Carrie. Bride's Dock on Portum Island. Book 7 by Debbie Civil. Copyright 2023 by Debbie Civil. All rights reserved. Narrated by Ishkia Page. Prologue.
Cassandra. Thank goodness. We, can't breathe.
Lance Taylor gasped as he stumbled into the mail-order bride agency's tiny office. Cassandra Hall, Portum Island's matchmaker, carefully put her cup of tea on her tidy desk, her brown eyes assessing her business partner. Judging by the dress shirt that was buttoned incorrectly, he had yet again woken up 10 minutes after his alarm sounded. "Lance, what's going on?"
"Councilman Teriz is headed this way. I ran into him in the lobby. He was complaining about Presley and how much trouble she caused."
Cassandra's heart rate picked up, concern making her lightheaded. She rubbed the spot between her eyes, trying not to read too much into the councilman's visit. "Is this about the provisional business license?" The memory of that horrid letter sent to Cassandra flashed in her mind.
Dear Cassandra, in a month the council will convene to discuss the fate of your matchmaking business. In the meantime, we advise that you select your next match with care. The women you have invited to this island thus far have been embroiled in drama. We are displeased because our resources were used to settle some of these disputes. Not long ago, one of the mail-order brides you matched to an upstanding citizen was temporarily deported from the island. What's unforgivable was the other bride, whom you matched with an affluent businessman, led a mob into the councilman's chambers. Your business can benefit the young men on this island, but we aren't convinced that your judgment is sound. We're writing you to notify you of the possibility of the council appointing a CEO to manage the mail-order bride agency. You may lose the autonomy that we graciously allowed you over the matchmaking service. We urge you to be cautious of your next selection. If there's one more misstep, there will be consequences. Sincerely, the council.
The councilmen were sensitive about allowing outsiders to roam the island, and yet the foolish men weren't good at keeping a deadline. Over 2 months had passed since the letter was delivered to Cassandra, and nothing had been said since. "I guess I'll find out if I have to pack up," Cassandra thought. Did Councilman Teriz explain the reason for his visit? Lance collapsed on his desk chair and ran his fingers through his shaggy brown waves.
"No, I thought warning you was more important than eavesdropping."
2 firm knocks told Cassandra that she was about to learn why a member of Portum Island's ruling council wanted to see her. "Okay, Cassandra, you've got this. Don't lose your temper. He'll hold it against you." After her mental pep talk, Cassandra brushed lint from her ankle-length blue dress and flipped some of her micro braids over her shoulder. She pressed a button on her desk to unlock the door, and the councilman stormed in, fury on his face.
Where are the samples?
Cassandra blinked, caught off guard by the question. He was referring to the spit samples that potential mail-order brides sent along with their applications. The invisible barrier around the island would inflict pain on anyone who didn't have the right DNA. Was the councilman planning on disposing of the applications? Cassandra took a deep breath and tried not to jump to conclusions. "Why do you need the samples?" An impatient expression flashed across the unwelcome visitor's face.
Forget the samples. I need to read the applications that you have received so far. If I find the perfect match and the barrier rejects her DNA, We could always sedate her before transporting her here.
The matchmaker gritted her teeth, not wanting to point out how selfish the man truly was. To avoid revealing the truth of the situation, Cassandra typically waited until the bride was on the yacht before explaining things. What if the bride refused to be sedated? Then they'd suffer agony while going through the barrier. Cassandra supposed that the Councilman Teriz wasn't concerned by the pain of the stranger. "I thought you were happily married to Bethany," Lance blurted out.
I'm happy with Bethany. It's Miles that's the problem. He's a grown man and has no prospects. All the women in the town think he's rude, lacks ambition, or is boring. I set him up on a date last week with Rachel Lester, and she walked out an hour in. You need to find a wife for him,
he insisted. Cassandra doubted that the right women were being tossed miles away. She didn't think the man had a mean bone in his body. She concluded that he made the mistake of telling a high society diva no. "Does Miles want a wife?" Cassandra calmly asked. Councilman Teriz tugged on the end of his purple tie.
He doesn't know what he wants, and time's running out. I'm planning to retire within the year. He can't become a councilman without a classy woman by his side.
Asher Lawson was elected to the council without having a wife, Lance countered.
Let me speak frankly. Asher's ambitious nature helped his rise to power. Since Miles is content to bag groceries, he needs a wife to push him into wanting more. Most of the young ladies you invited to our home have been troublemakers, especially that horrid Liz. You must choose an acceptable bride for my son.
I can't choose a bride for Miles without his consent.
Most of the council is doubtful that you're capable of picking brides that don't cause trouble. I haven't made my opinion known yet, but if you find me a perfect wife for Miles, I'll convince them that you are the best thing that ever happened to Portum Island.
Great. Councilman Teriz was resorting to bribery to get his way. "We'll do it," Lance replied before she could say, "Hell no." "Lance," Cassandra said, stretching out his name. Lance shook his head. "After the stunt Liz pulled, we need the support of as many councilmen as we can get." "How am I supposed to find the perfect wife for Miles if I haven't interviewed him?" Cassandra argued, uncomfortable with the meddling.
He's young, irresponsible, and lacks direction. What else do you need?
The councilman demanded. Cassandra could think of a boatload of relevant information that would be helpful, but didn't bother saying a word. The stubborn man had made up his mind. Chapter 1. It was late March, and Carrie had forgotten to wear a coat. That was the reason why she rushed like a horde of spiders were chasing her into the one-story ranch home she shared with her older brother, Simon. It was unfortunate that Carrie wasn't looking down. She tripped over an object and went sprawling. She caught herself on her hands, preventing her forehead from colliding with the tiled floor. Carrie's stomach made contact with something hard. Before she could whine about the slight pain, a voice reached her ears.
"I told you, Simon, it's over!"
The banshee-like shrieking came from Carrie's brother's longtime girlfriend, Brittany Harper. Well, long-term wasn't the right way to describe them, apparently. Carrie let out a curse, recalling that she had thought the pair were headed to the altar. Hell, that had been one of the reasons why she had signed up for the mail-order bride service. Deciding that half lying on top of what she realized was a box while her stinging palms pressed against the floor wasn't productive. Carrie slowly got to her feet. She glanced at the kitchen table that was a half a foot away from her and said prayers of thanks. Showing up to the mysterious island with a bandaged forehead wasn't a good look. For once, the Clumsy Carrie nickname could be nothing more than a dreadful memory. Hopefully, Presley, her friend that lived on the island, had kept her trap shut about Carrie's unfortunate reputation. "Brittany, you don't need to stand there and keep repeating yourself. If you want things to be over, then leave. I won't be taking you back if you change your mind," Simon said with a cool tone. "Dang it, I liked her," Keri thought. Before she could go into the living room to convince the couple to give love another chance, Brittany stormed into the kitchen. Her chocolate brown eyes widened upon spotting Carrie. Simon's ex crossed her arms over her chest. "I thought you were at the high school." The memory of the botched interview made Carrie wince. It had been a Hail Mary, her last attempt at staying in a smothering small town. "I was just—" Brittany shook her head, her silky, shoulder-length black hair bouncing about. "You screwed it up, didn't you?" "Ouch. Could the broad have a little faith in me?" Carrie asked herself. "Yeah, right. I don't even have faith in myself. I fail at everything I try. I've never had a boyfriend. I've never had a job. And if Principal Turner is to be believed, I'll never work in education. No, Brittany tossed up her hands. "I begged my father to get you that interview. What did you do?" Carrie shifted on her feet. "This time, I didn't do anything. Tell me what happened." Dread filled Carrie's heart. "You know how I'm bad at names, right? I could have sworn that Principal Turner's wife's name was Sally. I ran into the couple last week while at the movies with Yolanda. So when I went into my interview, I saw Principal Turner talking to a woman I thought was another teacher. I greeted them before saying it had been lovely seeing him and his wife Sally at the movies. It turns out Sally wasn't his wife, but his mistress. That teacher he was talking to was his wife, Janice." Brittany paled. "Principal Turner is having an affair?" The woman's screeching caused a fact to pop into Carrie's mind. Holy smokes! Principal Turner was her godfather. Oh, crap. "Well, Get out of my way, clumsy Carrie!" Brittany's beautiful face was twisted with anger. Why in the world was that directed at Carrie? She wasn't the Principal Turner's side chick. Deciding that there was no reason to continue speaking to Brittany, Carrie escaped into the living room. Simon was sitting on the couch, his hand massaging his forehead. Carrie sat beside her brother, who straightened upon seeing her. His brown eyes filled with warmth, and a slight smile lifted his lips. To her, Simon was a tall, strong teddy bear who protected the ones he loved. The people in town dubbed him as an unapproachable guy whom no one wanted to cross. The siblings had the same curly black hair and caramel-colored skin. Simon was 6'4", with bulging muscles gained from his time working as a ranchman for Mr. Sanchez's cattle ranch. He was still wearing his flannel shirt, blue jeans, and cowboy boots, though his skin didn't show an ounce of sweat. He also had a bruise on his jaw. Carrie lifted her hand and gently touched his bruise. "What happened?" Simon scowled. "Pat and I got into a fist fight." "Why?" "I heard him talking bad about you. I got fired, and Brittany called me irresponsible and broke up with me." Guilt and regret mingled in Carrie's gut. Had she moved out of town sooner, Simon would now be happily engaged and still employed. She needed to get out of her brother's hair as quickly as possible. "I'm sorry, Simon." "I'm not. No one's going to talk about my sister that way." "But your life's ruined. You were going to propose to Brittany, and now you can't. KK, don't you worry about Brittany and me. We were about to break up. She wanted me to kick you out so she could move in. She wouldn't even wait until you got a job." Had Carrie told Simon of her plan to become a mail-order bride, the couple wouldn't have argued about Carrie living with him. Part of Carrie didn't want to speak up. Simon would have talked her out of it. And what if Cassandra couldn't find her a groom? It was like the matchmaker was a telepath. The sound of a gong blared from the kitchen. Carrie let out a squeal and got to her feet. She rushed into the kitchen, a smile on her face. Brittany and the cursed box were long gone. Carrie's purse was on the kitchen floor with an envelope on top of it. She opened her purse and fetched her battered phone, answered the call, and pressed it to her ear. She only knew it was Cassandra because Presley had shared the matchmaker's contact info with her. "Hi, this is Carrie." "Well, duh, you knew that. You're calling me. So, hi?" "Shut up, shut up, shut up. Carrie, what is wrong with you?" "Hi, Carrie. I'm Cassandra, your matchmaker. Do you have a moment to speak?"
"Of course."
Carrie sat on the closest chair and tore open the envelope, deciding she could multitask.
"Dear Simon, Brittany has informed me that you're no longer in a relationship. Since you have a month-to-month lease, I'm requesting that you vacate my home in 30 days.
Carrie's hands shook. She tried not to feel any anger toward Brittany's father, Jim. "Carrie, did you hear me?" Carrie realized she couldn't multitask after all.
"Sorry, what did you say?"
"I found a match for you. His name is Miles Teriz. Will you be able to leave in 2 weeks?"
"Yes, but can I bring someone with me?"
"I found a match for Yolanda, so she'll be traveling with you." Carrie wanted to fist pump. Presley, Yolanda, and Carrie were as tight as sisters. They'd finally be reunited again.
"That's great. I'm happy that Yolanda's traveling to the island with me. But I was talking about I have an older brother, Simon. Since our parents live in Florida, he's the only family I have here. Simon is a ranchman. I imagine that Portum Island has plenty of farms and ranches.
Yes, Simon can come. Will he be willing to relocate to the island?"
Yes, our lease is up."
Simon chose that moment to enter the kitchen, a stunned expression on his face. He snatched the piece of paper from Carrie's hand. The moment her brother read the words, he stiffened. "I see. I'll email you the details. Would you like to pay extra to rent a wedding dress?" Guilt pummeled Carrie's chest. Her parents were going to be pissed about missing her wedding.
"Yes, I'll send you my measurements."
"Perfect. I'll email you the itinerary soon. I can't wait to meet you, Carrie." After Carrie hung up, she made eye contact with her brother.
I have a confession to make, Simon."
Simon's dark eyes were filled with anger. "You knew Brittany was going to have her father evict us?"
"No, I just found that letter on top of my purse.
She was planning to break up. The letter's dated with yesterday's date."
"Yeah, that's terrible. I signed up to be a mail-order bride."
Carrie shouted those last words with stress and anxiety in her tone. Simon looked astonished. "What?"
"I used the same agency that Presley used. Cassandra, my matchmaker, said that I can take you with me."
Carrie was ready to hear an argument. After all, Simon was the protective sort. But her older brother let out a sigh. "Let me guess. Yolanda signed up too."
"Yes,"
Carrie said, a smile on her lips. "Then I guess we're moving to an island in the middle of nowhere." Chapter 2. It was Saturday evening, and the processing center was nearly empty. The processing center was where Portum Island's residents could receive the goods they ordered online. Since Portum Island's processing centers were closed on Sundays, Saturdays were usually the busiest days. But tonight, an event was occupying the time of the prominent members of the island. Therefore, Friday had been the day when the stream of customers had picked up their orders. Miles Teriz rang up the final customer of the night, a woman with a purse half her size. She smiled at the box that was in her cart. Her blue eyes were wide with excitement, and her red lips were painted in a way that drew attention to their plumpness. He could tell by the low-cut dress she was wearing that her whole look was to entice a suitor.
Miles, are you going to Diana Adams' charity ball?
The thought of going to anything that involved wearing a suit and tie made Miles itch. That scene wasn't for him. Besides, attending a charity ball would get in the way of what he was trying to accomplish. I wasn't lucky enough to be invited. The stranger gasped, her eyes going wide.
Your father is a councilman, and you expect me to believe you weren't invited?
And there it was. The beauty wanted something from the Teriz family. If you want to talk to my father, you could always send him an email. He loves hearing from his constituents.
The woman blushed. I was kind of hoping that you and I could go together.
Miles wasn't trying to remember this woman's name. He hadn't seen her before. He looked at her jet black hair, tan skin, and the freckle on her nose. Nope, this wasn't someone he went to school with. The package she was holding had been sent by a Jessica Murphy from Arizona. The unknown woman had sent 10 packages in the last month. What rose Miles' suspicion was that 3 different people had picked up the packages despite the fact that they were always addressed to Kyle Cummings. Kyle was too good to pick up his packages. I'm sorry, what is your name?
Kelly Cummings. I picked up the TV for my twin. So can you take me to the ball?
Jackpot. Finally, someone close to Kyle picked up one of the packages, Miles thought. Kyle would lead him to his target. Miles supposed he could have gotten close to Kelly, but she might blow his cover. It was best to be discreet about things. Do you have an invitation? Kelly grinned.
You could get us one.
Miles sighed. You're out of luck, Kelly. But it was nice meeting you.
If you actually tried, you could be powerful.
Yeah, because the only thing people wanted on this island was to join the dreaded council. Sorry to disappoint you, Kelly. I'm just a simple man. After a look of disappointment flashed on her face, Kelly Cummings left the processing center. As the door closed behind her, Miles wondered how much more of this he could take. That had been the 4th woman in the last 6 weeks to try and get him to snag an invitation to Diana Adams' ball. If he reached out to his father, he was certain he could get one. But Miles didn't get into such extravagant shows. He donated to Portum Island's orphanage anonymously. He didn't need anyone knowing he donated or craved a reward, such as a delectable steak dinner. All he wanted was for the orphans to have a nice, comfortable home. Kendrick, his boss, strode over to him. The man had changed ever since his wife, Julia, came into the picture. He was more carefree, excited, and exhausted. Hey, man, mind if I leave early? Miles shrugged. You're the boss. Kendrick shook his head. Technically, Marcus is the boss. I'm the manager. Do you think you can run the store for 20 minutes by yourself? There are no scheduled orders. Miles's body flooded with impatience. Once he was alone, he could get down to business. This was the moment he had been waiting for. I can handle things. Tell Julia and Layla I said hi. Jealousy momentarily consumed Miles. He would have loved to start a family, but didn't think it aligned with his career aspirations. Citizens of Portum Island had extended lifespans, so he supposed he had plenty of time to find Mrs. Right. He just couldn't figure out if he would actually opt for a mail-order bride or get to know one of the lovely ladies here. It was probably going to be the latter, since Miles was suspicious of strangers. Miles was about to encourage Kendrick to go home again when his mother, Bethany, rushed into the processing center. His mother was wearing a form-fitting, knee-length, champagne-colored gown. Her dark hair was up in a twist, and her face was made up. Miles wanted to curse when Kendrick walked over to her. "Miss Teriz, you look stunning tonight. How can I help you?" She's up to something, Miles thought. What Miles really wanted was time alone in the processing center. If Bethany Teriz, the wife of one of the council members, hadn't waltzed in, Kendrick would have been inclined to leave. Damn it all to hell. Mom's always ruining my plans. You can assist me by allowing my son to leave early. Tonight's a special occasion for my family. Kendrick, since family's important to you, I'm sure you understand. Miles grasped the opening before Kendrick could speak. Mom, I offered to stay until closing. Kendrick needs to get home to his wife. She's due any day now. Kendrick thankfully didn't call him out on the slight exaggeration. His mom smiled. Of course. Kendrick, how's Julia doing? She's doing good. All things considered. Layla's finally sleeping through the night. I love my little girl, but man, does she have a set of lungs on her. Miles' shoulders relaxed. His mother would surely take pity on a woman who was heavily pregnant while trying to care for an infant. I'm so happy that you get to bask in the joys of fatherhood. I myself enjoyed when Miles was young, although he did have colic when he was an infant. It broke my heart. I totally understand that you'd like to get to your wife. Miles's heart sank when Bethany pulled her smartphone from her handbag. She tapped out a message, then her face lit up. A minute later, Marcus Lawson, the owner of the processing center, strolled in. He was dressed in jean shorts and a tank shirt. His blue eyes took in the situation. Kendrick, go home. I'm sure Julia needs you. Kendrick grinned, wished everyone a good night, and left. Marcus next eyed Miles. Miles, I'm going to close up a bit early. Everyone picked up their orders already. Crap. How the hell was he going to argue with Marcus? Miles shoved down disappointment that bubbled to the surface. Thanks, boss. See you on Monday. He stepped from behind the counter and headed to his gleeful mother. Unless he worked some magic, he'd be at the charity ball, drowning in sweat. Miles hated wearing formal wear. Mom, what's the plan? His mother grinned. Something you're going to love. You'll get your surprise in an hour. Miles knew for a fact that the charity ball wasn't starting until 7. It was 10 minutes to 5, which meant they had more than an hour. Bethany liked showing up 30 minutes late to everything. But could a ball be considered a surprise? And since when did his parents spring surprises that involved his mother fetching him from his place of work? Something wasn't right. Miles wasn't going to find out while standing in the processing center. He supposed he might as well move things along. All right, Mom, lead the way. Bethany smiled. I promise you're going to love your surprise. I question your father's sanity at first, but I think he's right about this. I hope he is, Miles said. Then he followed his mother into the blistering heat. Chapter 3. Carrie tilted her face up to the sun, reveling in the warmth it bestowed on her skin. The sunshine wasn't only a comfort, but a signal of change. On Portum Island, things were going to be different. The clumsy Carrie nickname in her rear-view mirror. Well, technically, it wasn't in her rear-view mirror, since she was now sitting on a luxurious yacht. The deck was comfortably spacious, with chaise lounges, deck chairs, and a cooler stuffed with food. Simon sat beside her, his blank expression causing concern to trickle into her heart. It had been 2 weeks since Brittany, the love of his life, broke up with him. They had been evicted from the home they rented for 2 years. Simon lost his job as a ranchman, and now he was starting all over again. If Carrie thought about it, not much was really changing for her. Yes, she was gaining a husband, but her 2 best friends were still going to be in her life. Her best friend, Yolanda, was sitting across from her, scrolling on her phone. Yolanda's parents, Phil and Alyssa, were on either side of their daughter. They weren't staying on the island. just hanging around until they made sure that Yolanda's husband wasn't a serial killer. Keri regretted that her parents couldn't make the trek to Portum Island, too. They had booked a cruise for the same week, but Simon had promised to send them the wedding video. Aside from Yolanda, her parents, Simon, and Cassandra, there were 3 more people on the boat. A stunning woman named Leah, who had long jet black hair and copper skin, sat on the deck chair furthest away from the group, crocheting a blanket while humming to herself. Beside her was Alina, a short woman with stunning black ringlets that fell to the middle of her back. Her honey-brown skin was blemish-free, and her big brown eyes held warmth for her son Felix. He sat beside her, entertaining himself by playing a game on her phone. Neither Leah or Alina knew of Portum Island's magical properties. Keri could tell by how suspicious they had been after the plane landed and it was revealed that they would have to take a yacht to their final destination. Alina looked down at her son, her brows furrowed in concern.
Where did you say we were going?
The young mother directed the question at Cassandra, who looked out at the horizon as if the answer was written there. Keri wasn't looking forward to the awkward conversation, wanting to avoid drama at all costs. She had only believed Presley's explanation because her friend was an honest person. Cassandra straightened and made eye contact with everyone in the group. Portum Island is a special place. There was a reason why I needed DNA samples from anybody interested in becoming a mail-order bride.
You're doing a good job, Cassandra. Just rip it off like a Band-Aid,
Keri thought. She shot the matchmaker an encouraging smile.
I thought you didn't want to match us with family by accident,
Leah replied in a breezy tone. I guarantee that is impossible, since the inhabitants of the island can trace their lineage back to the 1700s or more. I needed the DNA samples because Portum Island has a protective barrier around it. It will reject the DNA of certain people. While Alina looked like she was on the verge of a heart attack, Leah grinned.
So you're saying the barrier is a sentient being?
Cassandra frowned. Oh, I never thought about it like that. But there are more effects that I need to make you aware of. The island stops the aging process. You'll have an extended lifespan. Alina made a sign of the cross.
Am I going to a cult?
Keri could tell Alina was trying not to freak out for her son's benefit. The 7-year-old, bless his heart, was still focused on the phone. He didn't even notice the tense conversation the adults were having. Keri hated seeing people suffer, so she figured it was time for her to step in.
No, you're most definitely not going to a cult. My best friend and her twin both live on this island. They're safe and happy, and I've spoken to my best friend Presley's husband a couple of times. We FaceTimed the other night.
Alina frowned.
And you expect me to take your word for it? I barely know you.
How about you don't make any judgments until you see what's going on? Yolanda piped up, not liking that Keri's character was being questioned.
Some of us have more than one person to think about. I need to make sure Felix is safe. I can't risk my son's life to verify this crazy lady's claims.
Alina wrung her hands like she was being overwhelmed by stress. Yolanda shrugged. Unless you have another place to go, you have to verify her claims. It isn't like there's a boat that you could hop on. Cassandra lifted her hands in the air. Ladies, be prepared. We're about to go through the barrier. Keri grabbed Simon's hand, not liking the idea of being in total darkness. He snickered, but squeezed her hand. Yolanda looked more curious than afraid. The barrier was upon them. The group was plunged into the total darkness, with Felix letting out a shriek at the change. Moments later, the air filled with an electrical charge and crackled. 30 seconds later, the boat emerged in crystalline blue water, with Portum Island shining like a beacon in the distance. The return of sunlight seemed to excite the boy. Felix got to his feet and glanced around.
"That was a cool magic trick,"
he exclaimed. Alina, unfortunately, didn't share her son's delight. The poor woman fainted. Cassandra blinked. No one has ever had that response before. Leah folded her blanket and put her belongings back into her purse.
"Maybe the barrier overloaded her system, or her doubt hurt its feelings somehow."
Cassandra rubbed her forehead. "Leah, I think she's probably fainted from shock." The woman shrugged.
"If you say so. Big guy, are you looking forward to carrying her?"
Leah pointed at Simon, who nodded.
"Just don't fall in love with her. Your heart is meant for someone else. Your vibes and Elena's aren't compatible,"
she advised. Simon glanced at Leah as if she had two heads, but the woman wasn't fazed by his reaction.
"Doubt me now, but in 6 months you'll see what I mean."
By the time the group disembarked the yacht, Alina had thankfully regained consciousness. Simon gently put her on her feet in front of the cart, holding a sign that read, "Alina and Felix." Carrie was shocked when only 2 duffel bags were loaded onto the cart. Leah had the most baggage, occupying 3 carts. Simon and Carrie each had their own cart. Dock workers quickly loaded their belongings in their respective carts as the group stood under the baking sun. Cassandra made eye contact with everyone. "Yolanda, you and your parents are with Dana." One of the triplets stepped forward and led Yolanda and her family away. "Leah, Alina, you're both with Sadie." Cassandra waited for the others to leave before she spoke again. "And you both will be with me. Our destination isn't too far away." Butterflies danced in Carrie's gut. In a matter of minutes, she would be united with her groom.
"Why do you look so nervous?"
Simon suddenly asked Cassandra. Carrie blinked, surprised by the question. She studied the matchmaker, who wore a tight smile. "This was my most challenging placement. The groom wasn't the easiest person to match." Carrie stiffened.
"Does he have a short temper? I don't do well with temperamental people."
Cassandra shook her head. "Miles is one of the nicest people I know. It's complicated. Why don't we get moving?" Simon crossed his arms.
"How about you fess up?"
"A lot is riding on this match. Let's get going. We're on a tight schedule." Cassandra's stressed tone was making Carrie uneasy.
"Is he going to be unhappy with me or something?"
Perhaps Presley had blabbed about Carrie's horrible clumsiness. Cassandra's smile brightened. "He'll love you. You're exactly the kind of person he would typically go for." Simon studied the matchmaker.
"What's the problem then?"
Cassandra let out a sigh. "His parents applied to get a mail order bride on his behalf. They are powerful people, and I couldn't say no to them, considering they're on the council. I usually don't accept these kinds of jobs." Simon frowned.
"Miles doesn't know my sister's coming, does he?"
Cassandra reluctantly shook her head. "But the wedding is happening tonight. We're already behind schedule." Disappointment shattered Carrie's heart. She had been hoping that Miles was open to loving her. She was prepared to forge a new identity. She hadn't thought that she was going to be forced on a groom. There was no way he'd choose to marry her. If he took one look at Carrie, he'd say, "Hell no."
"No, Carrie. He doesn't know about your unfortunate accidents. If you act normal, he'll want to marry you." After the mental pep talk, Keri let out a shaky breath. Let's go. I hate being late. She hoped that Miles would be easy to fool. Was it too much to hope for love at first sight? Cassandra shook her head.
Our rides will be here shortly.
Chapter 4. Keri blinked when a luxurious carriage appeared by the dock. It was pulled by two magnificent white horses with blue tassels hanging from their harnesses. The coachman was a tall, burly man with honey-brown skin and dark brown hair. He wore a wide-brimmed hat, a tank shirt, and jean shorts with black sandals on his feet. He stepped down and shot Cassandra a grin.
Cassie, you're looking fine today.
Cassandra looked like she was about to have a heart attack.
Eduardo, what are you doing here?
The man grinned.
I'm here to pick up Miles's bride. You must be Carrie.
Keri stepped forward and held out her hand. I am. Is this how people typically travel on the island?
Eduardo smirked. Only the rich, honey. The poor folk like me either have to travel on horseback or hoof it.
Keri looked down at her outfit, wondering if it would impress Miles. She had chosen to wear one of her favorite baby blue sundresses with flip-flops, hoping she could dip her feet in the water. But Keri wasn't counting on the weariness that traveling brought. Cassandra frowned.
Eduardo, where's Steve?
The coachman grinned.
There are only 4 seats in the carriage. You know the rich don't like being in tight spaces. Steve is going to pick you and Simon up. Carrie, you're coming with me.
Simon crossed his arms.
I'm not leaving my sister.
Cassandra shook her head.
Carrie is perfectly safe with Eduardo. I've known him for years. He'll keep her safe. He's a police officer.
Eduardo grinned.
Crime is so low the police force gives us chances to drive the rich and spoiled around.
Cassandra shot the coachman a disapproving glance.
Don't talk like that around Miles's family.
The man patted Cassandra on the head.
I'll talk the way I please. These people aren't deities, they're just people. If the Teriz family has an issue with how I'm talking, then they can drive the carriage.
Keri really liked his attitude. She could see someone like him impressing Presley. Cassandra mentioned we're running late, Keri said. If they lingered longer, Simon would continue to protest. Eduardo nodded. He loaded Keri's luggage into the carriage before helping her to step inside, where there were 2 plush bench seats. She sat on the row right behind the coachman's seat, and Eduardo grinned at her.
This carriage has a collapsible roof. Want me to put the roof on, or do you want to ride just like this?
Keri grinned back at him. I'd like to ride just like this. The carriage also had glass windows and curtains she could draw over them, but she decided she wanted the full effect. Eduardo hopped into the coachman's seat, and they were off. Miles followed his mother out of the processing center. Her eyes were searching the streets as if she'd expected someone. He had no idea what this woman was up to. The last time she surprised him, she had thrown a going-away party for him. Miles' parents had taken it upon themselves to apply to college for him. He got in, and they announced this to him in front of 200 of their closest friends. Did he enjoy his time in New York? Of course. Did he wish he could have chosen what school he went to? Naturally. Currently, Miles had a degree in business management he had no intention of using. Well, that wasn't entirely true. He wanted to use his degree in a way his parents wouldn't approve of. Was he going to be sent to grad school? He had no clue. But this time he would protest, even if it did embarrass them.
Mom, are you waiting for someone?
Eduardo is always late, she muttered to herself.
Miles snorted. Today was a busy day on the island, with the wealthy residents making last-minute preparations for the ball. Since the police officers were sometimes bored to tears, they had side gigs. His best friend drove carriages. The fact that Eduardo was involved made him less nervous. His friend wasn't shy about telling his parents to butt out of Miles' life.
"What's the surprise?"
Miles asked. Bethany grinned. "You'll have to see it for yourself." The clopping of hooves alerted Miles that a carriage was coming. Moments later, the royal blue luxury carriage that the elite often rented approached them. Eduardo flipped Miles off from his seat. Bethany shot him a disapproving glance. Miles returned the gesture. Eduardo's laugh was loud and infectious. Despite herself, Bethany snickered a bit. His friend hopped down and opened the carriage door, eyeing Miles with disapproval.
"Man, you seriously didn't put much effort into this,"
his friend observed.
"Much effort into what?"
If his mother were going to blindside him about going to that horrid ball, she would have insisted he change. "Boys, why don't we get going? We don't want to ruin Leo's surprise." So the surprise was entirely his father's idea. Miles had no qualms about telling his dad to butt out. It was his mother he had a hard time disappointing. Eduardo, with ease, assisted Bethany into the carriage before gesturing for his friend to step up. Miles hoisted himself into the carriage and Eduardo shut the door behind him. He peeked over to his left, expecting his mother, but then froze. The person beside him wasn't his mother. She was a stunning beauty with a welcoming smile. She had brown eyes and skin that reminded him of his favorite caramel candy.
"Hi, I'm Miles."
Her eyes lit up. "I'm Keri Bradley. It's so nice to meet you, Miles. What is this building?"
"A processing center."
Was this woman so wealthy that she did not have to pick up her own packages? Or perhaps maybe she was a tourist? But the island didn't get tourists. But maybe they were doing a new program. After all, Cassandra had convinced the stuffy council to let her operate a mail-order bride service. Carrie snapped her fingers. "That's right. Presley did tell me about the order processing here. Have you met my friend?" Miles nodded.
"Sal and I went to high school together. Sal, Kevin, and I meet up once in a while to play darts."
"That's great. Do you meet up once a week, month, or year?"
"I don't know. It depends on what's going on. Sal's very busy with the orphanage, and Kevin's running the spa."
"I'd love to volunteer at the orphanage. I wonder if anyone needs a tutor. I know it's probably too late in the year to apply to one of the schools, but hopefully a position will open up in the fall." Miles smiled.
"You're a teacher."
"I hope to be a teacher, but I don't interview well, so who knows if that will ever happen."
"You can't be that bad."
The woman hesitated before replying. "Let's not talk about that. Let's focus on my strengths, like math."
"Oh, come on. I know there's a good story there. What happened during your last interview?"
Carrie shook her head. "It's not important." Miles playfully bumped her shoulder.
"It can't be as bad as what happened to me. I accidentally stained the carpet of the conference room, and that isn't the worst thing I did that day."
Chapter 5. "What happened?" Carrie asked, her eyes lighting up with interest. Miles smiled at her. Her new fiancé was intriguing. He was tall, thin, with brown hair and tan skin. His gray eyes were enchanting. She swore she could gaze into them for a lifetime without being bored. The warmth that radiated from them made her heart ache. If he decided she wasn't for him, Carrie knew she would be disappointed.
Fresh out of college, I decided I wanted to interview for an accounting firm. I was determined to get the job on my own, so I didn't tell my parents. It was one of those hot, miserable days, but I still wore a suit and tie. Since my parents didn't know I was interviewing, Steve wasn't available to pick me up in the carriage. Riding a horse was out of the question, so I decided to walk. On my way to the interview, a child holding an ice cream cone bumped into me from behind. I turned around and the kid was crying, staring at the dripping ice cream cone on the concrete. For some reason, I didn't think, wow, that kid got the back of my suit with that thing. I was more concerned about the poor kid. I pulled $5 from my wallet, handed it to the stressed-out mother, and said that the ice cream was on me. That stopped the kid from crying, so I went on my way. There was a man standing by an unhappy horse. I couldn't leave him in distress, and I did recognize the horse. It was Cello, one of the most stubborn horses I had ever worked with. I walked up to the man, calmed the horse, and thankfully, the man had an apple I could feed him. Then I moved along. When Mr. Parker escorted me to the conference room, I should have known something was wrong. He kept staring at me as if I was less than what he expected. In all the craziness, I forgot about the ice cream incident, so I sat down on one of the fancy chairs, and as soon as I could calm down, I noticed a stench coming from everywhere. Before I could investigate, Mr. Parker started asking questions. As he spoke, his nose kept twitching, and eventually tossed up his hands. I'll never forget what he said that day. He asked, "Why didn't you take a carriage to the interview?" In my stupidity, I explained I wanted to do this interview without my parents' help. Then he said, "Boy, all you ended up doing was tracking dung onto my carpet and staining one of my best chairs with ice cream." He wasn't impressed and didn't hire me.
Mr. Parker was such a tool, Keri thought. Then another thought occurred to her. Miles is kind and giving, and I'm deceiving him. I'm going to tell him what's going on now.
But before Keri could reveal the truth, Miles touched her knee. Butterflies stomped around her stomach as if they were heavy as a herd of excited elephants. "Do you see that building there? The one that looks like an office building? That's Portum Island's community center. It's sort of like a town hub. When companies are hiring, they reserve conference rooms, and people interview there. There are also classes you can take there. Esperanza, my friend Asher's wife, actually took a business class there and developed the idea for a spa with her two friends, Teresa and Kevin." Keri gazed at the building as the carriage drove past, contemplating if she'd ever step into those halls for anything. Thinking about interviewing gave her chills. After the slip of the tongue that led to a destroyed marriage, she didn't think she could do it again. "Go on. Tell me your crazy interview story." Miles's gentle tone made Keri wish she could confide in him. She turned to him and saw the openness in his face and thought maybe she could.
I accidentally outed someone as a cheater. I mistook his mistress for his wife when I saw him at the movies. Then, during my interview, I thought his wife was his secretary. Then I did the unthinkable. I asked the principal how his wife Sally was, and then I talked on and on about how nice it was to see them together. His wife Angela, who was not his secretary, wasn't thrilled about that.
Miles tilted his head back and let out a boisterous laugh.
That's priceless. He got what he deserved, too. You did Angela a favor.
I'm glad you think so, but Principal Thomas told me I'd never work in education again.
Miles scowled.
He made a mistake and blamed you. It was his fault he cheated. I don't see how that has anything to do with how good of a teacher you are.
Keri was so used to being put down by anyone who wasn't her friend that she was kind of surprised by his reaction. Townspeople called her Clumsy Keri to her face before and now also whispered it behind her back after the incident. I guess the townfolk thought differently. I kind of have a reputation for accidentally exposing things. One time in second grade, I accidentally revealed that the class goldfish had died. I overheard the teachers talking about the goldfish dying the previous day, so the next day I wore black, expecting to attend a goldfish funeral. When people asked me why I was in black, I blurted out it was for Goldie, the goldfish's funeral.
Imagine my surprise when Goldie was swimming in the bowl. That was when the teacher had to reveal that Goldie had died at least 6 times in the last year and was constantly being replaced. I think ever since then, I've had quite the reputation. Carrie was deceiving her future groom, and she knew it. There was no way she'd tell him she often spilled things, tripped, and had a habit of breaking her phone. Those were things Carrie was determined to fix about herself.
Miles shrugged. The teacher shouldn't have lied. I don't see anything wrong with what you did, and I can't stand liars myself, so I think I would have exposed them on purpose.
Nerves trickled down her spine. Miles hated liars, and she was deceiving him. Well, technically, his parents were deceiving him. But wasn't the lying by omission? She could have just blurted out, "Hey, Miles, I'm here to marry you." Carrie needed to shift the conversation quickly. The last thing she wanted was to give anything away. But before she could ask him something else, Miles spoke.
How long are you going to stay on the island? You're here to visit Presley, right?
Carrie looked away from Miles.
Actually, I'm a mail-order bride.
There was the awkward silence she had been dreading. She worried that Miles would ask her who she was marrying. What would she say then? "Isn't that nice, dear? Another wedding is happening." A female voice piped up. Carrie practically jumped out of her seat. She twisted around and realized that a tall, beautiful woman with dark hair, tan skin, and blue eyes was listening behind her. She wore a dress that was much fancier than what Carrie was wearing. Carrie blushed when she realized this woman had been privy to their entire conversation.
"Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't even notice you were there. I'm Keri Bradley. You must think I'm so rude."
The woman grinned. "Oh, my dear, the rude one is my son. He couldn't be bothered to introduce you. Well, it's nice to meet you. Call me Bethany." Despite Presley having warned Carrie that people aged differently on the island, her mouth still popped open. Bethany looked like she was barely 30. It was strange to consider her as Miles's mother. Carrie's amazement at the woman's appearance was shoved away when the question slipped into her mind. When was Bethany going to break it to her son that Carrie was his bride? Before she could even ask, there was a gentle tap on her shoulder. Carrie faced forward and glanced at Miles, whose eyes were lit up.
"Do you see that farm over there?"
He gestured to a large stretch of land with a sign that read, "O'Malley's Horse Farm."
"It's beautiful,"
Carrie gasped.
"Glad you think so. Eduardo and I have a different opinion of it. We actually met on this farm. I wanted pocket money, so I applied for a job in the stables. Eduardo fancied himself a horse trainer. He wasn't very good at it, so I ended up teaching the farmhands how to muck out stalls and take care of their horses. I rode and fell off my first horse on that farm."
Miles told Carrie a few anecdotes that got her laughing. In turn, Carrie spoke of Yolanda and Presley and how they met. On and on they spoke, getting to know one another with a lie hanging between them. Miles looked out of the window, then stiffened. He made eye contact with Carrie with surprise. The carriage was taking them through the high arching gates of a high-security community. Villas lined the well-manicured streets, adorned with palm trees in some of the residents' front lawns. Some villas were encased by high stone privacy fences. She could see residents leisurely going for walks, children licking overflowing ice cream cones, and a group of teenagers playing tennis on the courts. Carrie was curious to know if Miles' parents were putting them up in one of the villas as a honeymoon gift. Judging by the disinterest on Miles's face, he wouldn't welcome that. They pulled up in front of a home that was 2 stories high, made out of glass, wood, and stunning trimmings. Miles's confusion made Carrie's heart sink.
"Who lives here, Mom?"
"You do, dear. Your father and I bought you this
for you and your lovely bride."
Carrie wanted to shake Bethany. That was how she was going to break the news to her son? What was wrong with that woman?
Miles tilted his head as if trying to hear his mother better.
"I'm sorry. What are you trying to say? That this would be my home for me and my future bride? If so, no thanks. I'd rather live near the center of the island."
"No, dear, that's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying you and your current bride will live here."
Miles locked eyes with Carrie. "You're here to marry me, aren't you?"
She nodded, a guilty look on her face.
Chapter 6. Miles eyed Carrie, who looked like she'd rather be anywhere but in the carriage. He wondered what could have possessed her to become a mail-order bride for a groom who didn't know she was coming. She seemed accident-prone. He could tell by her personality. But he didn't think Carrie was a risk-taker. As soon as the carriage parked in front of the villa, Eduardo hopped down and opened the carriage door. Miles got out of the carriage and eyed his best friend.
"What did you know about this?"
Eduardo shook his head.
"I'm the help. Do you think they tell me anything? Mom thinks of you as a son. Can you stop it? I still can't believe that the sheriff decided that the deputies needed to be sold out as drivers. The more I tell him that this isn't the appropriate use of the police force, the more shifts he gives me."
Miles's interest was piqued.
"I assumed that you guys had a choice on if you picked up shifts. Officially, it's meant to look that way, but deputies who have said no have been penalized."
Miles was pissed that someone was abusing their position to help out the elite. Why couldn't they hire their own carriage drivers?
"Why would they even need you guys to be carriage drivers? Don't they have their own employees?"
Eduardo snickered.
"Ever since Liz Dawson led the protest into the council chambers, people are starting to see their worth. No more are they tolerating rude people who treat them like they are ants. Nope, they're finding jobs where their employers appreciate them. People like your parents don't abuse staff, but many do, and you know it."
Something occurred to Miles. His parents had a friendly driver named Steve. Miles had seen his wife, Karen, earlier, and she had mentioned that her husband was working today. Why then was Eduardo driving them around?
"Where's Steve?"
Eduardo sighed.
"Your bride comes with baggage."
The woman of the hour stepped down from the carriage. Well, that's probably what Carrie intended. Instead, she tripped over something and was sent tumbling towards the ground. Miles caught Carrie, his arms wrapping around her body. She peered up at him, blushing with embarrassment. Despite being angry at her for deceiving him, he couldn't stop the instinct to reassure her from bubbling to the surface.
"It's okay, beautiful. I've got you."
Carrie's arms tightened around him, and his heart began beating double time. Her vanilla scent intoxicated him in a way that he never felt before. Miles held her close, reveling in the contact. Miles was relaxed, hopeful, and was in danger of losing his heart. There was the pounding of footsteps on the pavement, and then his father said,
"Bethany, I think you are worried for nothing. It looks like the couple is getting along quite nicely."
It was the self-assured attitude his father had that was like water dousing a small flame. He pulled back from Carrie and turned to face the biggest meddler in his life. Leo Teriz was tall, thin, with peaches and cream skin and light brown hair. He inherited his father's brown eyes and smile. But the two men were different in nature. While Leo enjoyed controlling every situation, Miles was content to lay back and assist people when he could. Leo was currently wearing dress pants and a blue short-sleeved button-down shirt. Oddly enough, he wore black sandals on his feet instead of dress shoes. His mother was standing by the carriage, a frown on her face. She had been watching his exchange with Carrie the entire time. Unlike Leo, Bethany knew how to be discreet. "Dad, can you and I have a minute?" Miles kept a friendly tone since he didn't want his father to refuse. If his father even sensed that Miles would show resistance, the man would dodge him like a doe dodging a hunter.
Why do you want to talk to me? I'm sure you'd rather get to know your lovely bride.
Great. Leo was socially pressuring him to marry Carrie. Carrie shifted from foot to foot, her hands beginning to ring. Her discomfort was making Miles's chest ache. The last thing he wanted was to make her feel unwanted. Hell, he had been jealous when she said she was getting married. Before then, Miles had been interested in asking Carrie on a date. But how could he trust someone willing to deceive him? Perhaps hearing Carrie's side of the story would help him decide what to do. "Okay, then. Carrie, how long did you know that I didn't know about this marriage?" Miles asked. The beautiful woman's eyes landed on the concrete.
"Cassandra told me right before Eduardo picked me up. I honestly wasn't sure what was going to happen. I'm sorry I didn't mention it to you as quickly as possible. We were getting along, and I thought I thought I could win you over."
Miles let out a breath. "What if we go on a couple's date to see if we match? I enjoyed our time together in the carriage for the most part." Councilman Teriz shook his head.
Son, the laws strictly state that no bride can stay on the island if they aren't married within 24 hours.
Exasperation flared in Miles's chest. His father had dragged an innocent woman to the island knowing there was a chance that she'd be sent away? What was this crazy man thinking? "You know what he was thinking, Miles. He was thinking you would go right along with this," Miles thought to himself. "Dad, this is beyond controlling. You have overstepped. Why did you think picking a bride for me was okay?" Councilman Teriz shook his head.
I technically didn't choose her. Cassandra did. Besides, your friends are so happy with their brides. And like what your mother said, you're getting along with Carrie quite nicely.
Miles was angry that Carrie was caught in this. There was no way in hell he'd agree to marry her. Thinking of letting her go sent regret through his veins. But Miles knew that if he went along with this, his father would only meddle more. Miles eyed Carrie, who had a look of horror on her face. He couldn't blame her.
"You know what? I agree with Miles here. This is a little much. I'm not sure why I ever went along with this. If Miles doesn't want to marry me, I'm fine going back to Virginia."
Miles was about to tell Carrie he liked her, but they weren't getting married. It didn't matter that Carrie was extraordinarily beautiful and had a kind spirit. Who cared that he wanted to experience her lips on his? He wasn't going to tie someone to him because his father said so. Besides, this wasn't the only issue. How on earth did the council think that it was going to be okay to pressure people into marriage? Why can't the brides spend time with potential partners and marry if they're suited? Miles was confident that given the time, he could have fallen for Carrie. Miles cleared his throat. "Carrie, His phone rang, and he glanced at the caller ID. Oh, goodness, it was his friend Sal. He hit answer and pressed it to his ear. His friend let out a groan. "Hey, man, I hate to ask, but are you busy? We're having a problem." "What kind of problem?" Miles asked. "Tell Carrie her brother got into a scrape. He was defending Jill from a robber. Since he isn't a citizen, Simon was arrested. Do you think your father can do anything?" Yeah, right. Councilman Teriz couldn't do a thing. The laws he made were part of the problem, Miles thought. Not for the first time, Miles wondered if all the council members needed to be replaced. Thanks to the council's barbaric rules, someone can only be a citizen if they're married. Do you think that someone would be willing to marry Simon for now?
Probably.
So tell Simon to marry whoever steps forward, and I'll see if I can take it from there. He disconnected the phone, and Carrie shot him a worried glance.
What's happening with Simon?
When Miles gazed into Carrie's eyes, he knew two things. Number one, parting Carrie from Simon would be the most heartless thing anyone could ever do. She would be miserable if she went back to the mainland without him. Number two, he was going through with the wedding. There was no way he would ever put a woman through the ordeal of being separated from her family. Besides, Miles adored the orphans and the staff that ran the orphanage. He'd do Simon a solid, since the man stuck his neck out for people he didn't know. All those excuses sounded like crap to Miles. Maybe he just didn't want to face the fact that he was already starting to like Carrie. But he wouldn't let his father know that. He'd be gloating for generations to come. Chapter 7. Simon was in danger of becoming a prisoner, and it was all her fault. All Carrie could think about was that she convinced Simon to come to this island. After his initial agreement, he had his doubts the night before.
Simon, this will be a new start for both of us,
she had told her brother. Prison was hardly a new start, and she'd be tossed off the island. If her brother was imprisoned for months, Carrie wouldn't be able to visit him during visitation hours. Panic nearly choked her, and all Carrie could do was force air through her lungs. Gentle hands cupped her face, and the panic subsided. She focused on Miles's beautiful gray eyes. His expression grew soft as they stood like that. Everything's going to be okay. You need to take deep breaths for me, in and out. They spent a couple of minutes breathing together, his hands never leaving her face. As Carrie's mind cleared, she began devising a checklist. Number 1, find a groom to marry her. Although she felt butterflies when Miles was near, she had set her feelings aside. He wasn't going to marry her. Number 2, try to convince one of the local women to marry Simon. He was a catch, so it would be easy to sell him to the right woman. Number 3, find Simon a good lawyer. Maybe since Councilman Teriz orchestrated the farce of a transaction, he would be willing to do her a favor. She was duped into coming to this island by believing her groom was willing. With those plans in mind, anxiety faded. Carrie was sure she could accomplish number 1 by calling Presley. Her best friend knew everyone. She was about to pull out her phone when Miles's words distracted her. Beautiful. Did you pack a wedding dress?
No, I rented one from Cassandra.
I'm sure you can get your money back for the rental. Carrie blinked, surprised that Miles would be so cruel at a time like this. But then he gently pressed a kiss to her forehead. You'll have to get married in what you're wearing. Carrie was so stunned she didn't know what to say. Hadn't Miles been about to send her off the island? What changed? Before she could ask him, an arm tugged her away from him. She glanced over at Bethany, who smiled widely. I agree, dear. The dress Carrie is wearing will have to do. Leo, where is the Reverend? The councilman flushed.
He was supposed to come with Cassandra.
Eduardo crossed his arms. I have to bring the carriage back to the carriage house. I can't make another trip. Bethany snapped her fingers. Leo, you'll have to marry them. Do you at least have a marriage license? Councilman Teriz grinned.
It can be signed virtually.
Eduardo pulled out his phone. I'll take the video of this.
Carrie grinned. You'll have to send me the video afterwards. I promised I'd send my parents the video of my wedding ceremony.
Where are your parents, beautiful?
Miles asked. On a cruise. They hadn't had time to cancel it when Cassandra gave me my wedding date.
Councilman Teriz clapped his hands.
All right, let's get this show moving. Bethany and I are going to be late for the ball.
The ceremony was directed swiftly, with Carrie and Miles standing side by side. Bethany stood beside Eduardo, who was happily filming. The wedding wasn't anything special. It was kind of disappointing. They recited the traditional vows, and Councilman Teriz couldn't even be bothered to tell Miles to kiss the bride. Instead, he said,
And now you are married. Eduardo, can you please give Bethany and me a ride to our villa?
Miles's friend nodded.
It will cost you. I'm supposed to be off the clock.
The councilman scoffed.
Shouldn't it be your honor to serve a councilman?
Honor doesn't pay the bills,
Eduardo quipped. Carrie waited for her father-in-law to yell at Eduardo. She expected him to at least look offended. But Miles's father let out a chuckle before clapping the officer on the back.
You do have a point there, son. Let's unload Carrie's luggage so that we can leave the happy couple alone.
What about Simon?
Carrie demanded. Councilman Teriz glanced in Carrie's direction and shot her a soft smile.
All judges will be at Diana Adams's charity function. I'll get one of them to let him out of jail. Don't you worry. Your job is to stay calm. Son, let me handle this one.
The councilman could keep dreaming if he thought Carrie was going to do nothing but stay calm. Her older brother was potentially facing a prison sentence, but she wasn't going to contradict him. Miles did enough of that, and it didn't get her husband anywhere. Holy hell, Carrie was married. She was now Keri Teriz. She heard a ding and pulled out her phone. The councilman smirked.
It's for your own good, dear. Please sign that before I leave.
Miles must have received the same link texted to him because he also pulled out his phone. She clicked on the link, and sure enough, there was a virtual wedding license staring back at her. Carrie signed her name, her heart filling with conflicting emotions. She was relieved that she was married to someone she was attracted to and wanted to get to know. She was happy she wouldn't be deported from the island, but she didn't understand Miles's motives. Why had he suddenly wanted to marry her? Was it because of who she was? She wanted to snort. Of course, it wasn't because of who she was. She was Clumsy Carrie. No, wait. Miles didn't know about that unfortunate nickname. He called her Beautiful, a nickname she much preferred. She watched as the document updated in real time with Miles's signature first. His full name was Miles Frederick Teriz. It sounded stuffy, but she supposed that's the type of name a councilman would give his son. Next, Eduardo signed as a witness. She closed out of the document, knowing that her fate was now sealed. She was Keri Elizabeth Teriz, and she would be staying on the island. Carrie squeaked when she felt a hand rest on her shoulder. Her heart pounded double time, and her eyes were fixated on one focal point of the massive room. There was one California king-sized bed in the center of the room. The only issue was that it was actually the only bed in the house. The other 4 bedrooms were empty. Hell, the place didn't even have furniture, so it wasn't like she could sleep on the couch. The marble hardwood didn't look like it would be comfortable to sleep on. Beautiful. Are you okay?
Yes, there's just not much furniture here. I mean, all we have is a bed. Furnishing this house will cost a fortune. I don't really have that much money in my bank account. Hell, I don't even know what I bring to this marriage, other than cooking skills, my degree, and
Carrie's words dropped off as Miles began massaging her shoulders. Butterflies decided they were going to do a breakdancing routine in her stomach. Carrie's entire being filled with sensations she'd never felt before. How could she relax when all she wanted to do was turn around and press her lips to his? How could she relax when Simon was in danger of being convicted? Simon. That was like the proverbial bucket of Arctic water being dumped on her head.
I need to call Presley. She'll know what happened to my brother.
I've already reached out to Sal. Simon will spend the night in lockup, but he'll be bailed out by the morning. Carrie let out a gasp.
No, please no. They can't put my brother in jail.
Miles snorted. It isn't like the jails on the mainland. It's pretty much a suite with an en-suite bathroom, I promise you. He'll be living in luxury.
But he'll be held against his will.
Miles kissed her neck. It's okay, beautiful. Your brother will be safe. In fact, I'm sure my dad is trying to convince a judge to release him as we speak. He may not be successful, but if he is, Sal and Presley will take him in for the night.
Okay. I just don't know if I can stop thinking of my helpless brother trapped in jail.
He'll be fine. Now, let's get your mind off things. Have you eaten? Mom had the fridge stocked. Carrie's stomach growled.
I'm hungry, but
everything will be all right, beautiful. Let's eat and watch movies. Chapter 8. Carrie was flying high in the clouds, soaring like a bird encumbered by terrible emotions. She felt the warm sun on her face and was enchanted by the blue sky. She wished she could stay in the sky forever, where problems didn't exist. But then her back crashed against the marble floor. Her eyes flew open, and she found herself on the floor of the master bedroom. Cursing, she sat up and rubbed her eyes. The curtains had been drawn the previous night, keeping the sunlight at bay. Her phone was charging in a plug by her head. Since there was no furniture, she rested her phone on the floor. Carrie picked it up and noticed that she had missed a call from Presley. Immediately, the events trickled into her brain. Her arrival on Portum Island, Miles, unaware that his parents ordered him a bride, the wonderful carriage ride where they got to know each other, Miles almost rejecting her before he got the phone call saying that Simon was in jail. Their first night together. After eating salads at the kitchen island, they had retired to the bedroom, which thankfully had a TV. The internet was already set up, so they had been able to each pick a movie on Netflix. Miles chose a detective film, while Carrie opted for a blissful romance. They lay down on opposite sides of the California King, Carrie determined not to touch Miles. Her determination explained why she rolled too far and fallen onto the floor in her dream state. Shaking her head at the mishap, Carrie got to her feet and headed out of the bedroom and down the stairs. She called Presley, and by the time Presley answered, Carrie was already sitting at a bar stool at the breakfast bar.
Hey, Carrie. How was your first night as a married woman?
Carrie was shocked. That was the first question her best friend was asking her.
Do you know anything about...
Hold on. Yolanda's calling. I'm going to add her to the call. Carrie tapped the tabletop in impatience. All she wanted was an update about Simon. Councilman Teriz had texted his son late last night, letting him know that the judges couldn't release Simon until that morning. He most likely didn't have his phone in jail, so Carrie knew calling him would have been pointless.
All right, we're all here, ladies. How were your wedding nights? Presley, what do you know about Simon? Is he okay? Who married him? Is he out of jail?
Carrie's rapid-fire questions made Presley sigh.
Simon's fine. Someone married him at the jail this morning. Simon was taken back to the bride's house. Sal charged his phone for him and gave it to him, so you can check on him later. I'd give him a day to get used to her.
Get used to who? Presley was drawing things out just so she could have the dramatic effect she wanted. Keri knew it and wanted to strangle her friend.
For goodness sake, Presley, tell us who Simon ended up marrying.
Yolanda, the voice of reason, demanded.
Our matchmaker, Cassandra. She stepped up and married him without hesitation. I think it was because she felt she owed you one, Carrie. She never wanted to trick you into coming here. The councilman threatened her business.
Keri nodded.
Okay, I'll give them a day to get used to each other. Yolanda, how's Greg?
The sound of a fire alarm going off on someone's end of the line preceded one of Yolanda's groans.
I've got to go. I'll talk to you guys later. Tell me everything, Carrie. Don't leave anything out.
Keri gasped and dropped her phone in surprise. It had gone on speakerphone, startling her. Before she could start speaking, warm hands rubbed her shoulder blades. Carrie wore a tank top and pajama shorts to bed. His fingertips on her skin made her shiver. Beautiful. You should tell her what happened. Give her every detail. This was the worst time for Keri's phone to accidentally go on speakerphone. She blushed before a gasp left her mouth. Her husband had placed a kiss on her shoulder blade. Keri squeaked.
Pre, we'll catch up later. You can't shake me off that easily, Carrie. What's going on over there?
Keri let out another gasp when Miles' mouth brushed over a sensitive area on her neck.
Listen, girl, I'll call you later.
Keri quickly, desperately, pressed end. She was so vigorous that she accidentally turned on the music on her phone. A classic Britney Spears song blasted through the kitchen. Miles's chuckle caused hot air to brush against her skin. She didn't think she could endure him for one more moment. Keri quickly slid off the bar stool and said,
I need to brush my teeth.
Then she rushed back to the bedroom. She decided on a full-fledged shower, considering yesterday's adventures. After taking a quick shower and brushing her teeth, Keri decided that she was going to wear one of her favorite sundresses. She pulled on the blue dress and her flip-flops, then worked on her hair. After wrestling it into a ponytail, Keri left the bathroom and let out a shriek. Miles was standing in the middle of the room, shirtless. He had startled her. The man had silent footsteps for sure. He gestured to the towel laying on the bed. Just the girl I wanted to see. There's a picnic happening today I'd like to take you to. Are you interested in going?
Sure,
Keri said. Miles brushed a kiss to Keri's cheek before snatching up the towel and heading into the bathroom. Deciding that she might as well find something to snack on, Keri went back to the kitchen and blinked in surprise. Miles had already set out a muffin and an iced tea for her. Last night, Keri had expressed her dislike of coffee and hot tea. Her kind husband had remembered that. She plopped down at the bar stool and saw her phone was still in the same spot. She picked it up and noticed that she had unread messages. She clicked and discovered the text was from a new entry on her phone labeled Husband. Husband, good morning, wife. I was disappointed that I woke up without you. Husband, I didn't have a chance to tell you, but you're beautiful when you sleep. Keri blushed and considered what she could say to Miles. He was doing everything to show her that he wanted a genuine relationship. All she did was squeak, jerk away, and run. Maybe it was time to fall.
I enjoy your kisses. Hopefully, I get one after your shower.
That was lame as hell. Keri knew it. But that was the best she could do. It wasn't like she was well-versed in flirting, considering most guys she grew up with remembered her as clumsy Carrie. Deciding that she wouldn't think about all of the rejection she faced in Virginia, Keri dug into her blueberry muffin. She was proud of herself for the first time in forever. She didn't have many crumbs on her. She finished her food, cleaned up, and sent her brother a text.
Hey, Simon, how are you?
KK, did Miles marry you? Are you okay? Is he treating you right?
Yes, ×3, brother. I was more worried about you. How was the slammer?
The slammer was like a hotel room that locked from the outside. I promise, KK, I didn't have to do any hard time.
Is Cassandra treating you well?
She married me, didn't she?
Give her a chance, Simon. I know you're not a people person, but try with her. You deserve to be happy.
KK, you think a liar could make me happy?
She's not a liar, just somebody that was put in a bad position. I think you should give her a chance to explain. Besides, it all worked out. I'm fine.
KK, I'll give her a chance to tell the truth, but I doubt someone like her will.
I think you're judging Cassandra harshly. Trust me, big bro. Everything that Presley has told me about Cassandra points to her being a wonderful person.
Simon didn't respond to her after that. Then again, why would he? Her brother was stubborn and wasn't open to changing his way of thinking. Keri hoped that Simon would at least give Cassandra a chance. The last thing she wanted for her brother was to be in an unhappy marriage. Chapter 9. It was noon on Portum Island. The sun was pouring down with fierce intensity, but the heat wasn't what grabbed Miles's attention. The moment they disembarked from the porch, Miles stepped in front of Keri. Her eyes went wide when he cupped her cheeks. Beautiful. Did I tell you how stunning you look? Keri was dressed in a spaghetti-strap dress that reached mid-thigh. It was blue with a tight-fitting bodice that emphasized her cleavage. Her dark curly hair was up in a ponytail, and her lips had a shine to them. All he wanted to do was press his mouth against hers. I don't think you got the chance. As soon as I got dressed, we hurried out. But if I say so myself, you always look handsome. Miles was in a short-sleeved polo shirt and khaki shorts. It was too hot to wear anything else. He also knew this crowd was relatively laid back despite the luxury they lived in. He wouldn't have been surprised if his lunch was followed by someone suggesting to swim. Thank you, beautiful. Now it's time for my kiss. He pulled Keri to his arms, and their lips met. The moment her lips brushed his, Miles knew that kissing his wife would become one of his favorite pastimes. For a moment or two, they just shared close-mouthed kisses, but then passion got the better of him. Miles brushed his tongue against the seam of her lips, and she willingly opened for him. The kiss deepened, and his body ignited. As they kissed, he wanted to kick himself for suggesting the stupid outdoor meal. But then, the reminder that this wasn't simply an outing to get to know his wife trickled into his mind. Miles slowly pulled away before kissing her cheek. Good morning. Keri smiled.
It's technically afternoon.
Sorry. You kissed me so thoroughly I lost track of time. Keri giggled and punched Miles's arm playfully. Let's go. I don't want to be late. Miles held Keri's hand as they made their way from the villa to the picnic tables a block away. But by the time they arrived, Miles swore he had sweated a gallon of liquid. There were dozens of couples sitting at outdoor tables shaded by umbrellas. Coolers were lined up on the longest table. He guided his wife to the table and read the labels on the coolers. He found one for juice and grabbed an apple juice for Keri and a lemonade for himself. There were various sandwiches to choose from. Carrie's eyes lit up when she spotted the option for tuna wraps. She chose a wrap, and then he helped himself to a tuna wrap and a turkey and cheese sandwich before moving down the line. There were boxes that held an array of snacks. Carrie declined and went straight for the cooler of yogurt. After they grabbed their food, they sat at an empty picnic table. Miles hoped his mark would be at the brunch. His attention was diverted from his mission when he saw Carrie's lips move. It took a couple of seconds for Miles to make out what his wife was mouthing. She was mouthing, "Don't spill anything." He felt terribly for Carrie. She was often too hard on herself. Miles watched his wife cautiously unwrap her food as if it would explode on her. She took a delicate bite of the wrap and slowly placed it on the top of the paper plate. She had been freer with her actions when they had eaten alone. A feminine hand rested on Miles's shoulder. He knew it based on the floral perfume wafting into his face and the way the woman caressed his arm. Carrie's eyes went wide, then uncertainty filled her face. Miles glanced up and wanted to groan. It was the same woman who had wanted him to get her an invite to the ball. Trying to recall her name was starting to bug him. Too bad he couldn't refer to his notes. "Miles, fancy meeting you here. I thought you didn't associate with this crowd," the woman said. Miles racked his brain trying to recall when he told this woman he didn't associate with people who lived in the villas. "Did your brother enjoy his TV?" Miles asked. This woman didn't so much as flinch, which told Miles that she was either a good liar or that Kyle Cummings was keeping his operation a secret from her. "He hasn't opened it yet, so I wouldn't know. Who's the woman with you?" Interesting. Perhaps Kyle's sister hadn't realized that her brother was a no-good criminal. Miles was about to ask a follow-up question when he caught the sight of Carrie. She had an expectant expression on her face, like she wanted an introduction. Crap. Miles really didn't remember this woman's name. Maybe it was Katie. Yes. "This is my wife, Carrie. Carrie, this is Katie." A gasp was followed by her hand thankfully leaving his arm. "It's Kelly, not Katie. And when did you get a wife? You didn't mention this last night." This woman sounded like one of those crazy, jealous exes. "Oh, I was a mail-order bride. I'm not from here. Do you and Miles know each other well?" Carrie asked. "I know him better than you. Miles and I went to school together. In fact, your husband was a hot commodity around here. Had any of us known that he was looking for a wife, we would have stepped up our game." Kelly's reaction was filled with bitterness. Miles was confused by the energy, considering he hadn't even known her name. It wasn't like she was in the running. Miles would never have dated a woman like her. Carrie exuded warmth, was kind, and stunning. Miles was positive that Kelly's heart was tainted by envy and greed. "Well, Carrie coming to me was a surprise, and it's one I'll cherish for every day of my life." Miles's words made his wife smile. Kelly, on the other hand, huffed and walked off. Carrie eyed him with confusion. "Kelly's stunning. How did you not know her name?" Miles snorted. "That woman is a clout chaser. If I was the son of a stable master, she never would have looked twice at me." Carrie flushed. "I'd look at you even if you were a stable master, though there's nothing wrong with being a stable master. I imagine since there aren't too many cars on this island, a stable master's job is important. In fact, they help the island run. Think about what things would be like without horses. Miles gently put his hand over Carrie's. "I know what you're trying to say, beautiful. It's nice to know I would have turned your head even if you weren't a mail-order bride." With those words, the couple continued their meal. Thankfully, no other jealous women interrupted them. While Miles was chowing down on the last of the brownie he had gotten in the dessert cooler, his phone chimed.
Eduardo.
Target at 6 o'clock. Do you think you can engage?
Frustration nearly exploded in Miles's chest. He had been having such a good time with Carrie, but he had forgotten the purpose of being at this gathering. He needed to do his job to keep Portum Island safe. Now, his job was more important than ever since he had Carrie to think about. In the last day, the beauty had wormed her way into his heart. He was coming to care for her a great deal. He didn't want to get her mixed up in this, nor did he want to leave her on her own on the island.
Can you engage or not? I have Carrie with me. She can't know about this.
Miles, is everything okay?
His eyes left the phone and glanced at his beautiful wife. She shifted on her seat uneasily. No doubt she was probably thinking the worst, that he didn't want her.
Beautiful, I hate to cut this short, but I have business to attend to. Are you going to be okay walking back to the villa by yourself?
Carrie frowned.
Of course. I guess I could always call Presley back.
Carrie got to her feet, took 2 steps, and stumbled. She reached out to catch her fall, only to knock over the half-full bottle of juice that was resting on the table. Miles quickly righted the juice before it splashed on him. His poor wife looked so embarrassed.
Sorry, I'll clean this up. I feel so bad.
It's okay, beautiful. It's just spilled juice. I'll take care of it. Just head on home and reconnect with Presley.
That sounds like a plan.
Carrie collected all the trash at the table, tossed it in the trash can, and speed-walked away from the gathering. Now, it was time for Miles to make his move. Chapter 10. Spying was one of those things that seemed beneath an adult. One should be able to trust their spouse. Considering that Carrie had only met said spouse the day before, she decided that this trust didn't extend to him. As soon as she left the picnic area, she cautiously circled back, hoping her husband wasn't watching the entrance. She watched as Miles cleaned up the mess she made at the table. Embarrassment still lingered in Carrie's chest. She was doing so well until she knocked over that bottle of juice. Since Miles had quick reflexes, he managed to avoid getting any on himself. After cleaning up her mess, Miles made his way over to where Kelly was. Was that who he had to take care of? Carrie thought to herself. He smiled widely at the woman who thought Carrie didn't measure up. Kelly stood and grinned at Miles. They laughed about something, and then she tossed her arm over his shoulders. Great. Her husband had a wandering eye. She needed to get out of there. Carrie cautiously walked home, not wanting to fall flat on her face. She had the feeling she'd be looking for a new husband soon. The last thing she needed was for people to see her tripping everywhere. As soon as Carrie got to her villa, a stranger was waiting for her. She was short, with dark hair and golden brown skin, and had a baby bump. There was a stroller beside her. Carrie racked her brain trying to remember if this woman was at the picnic.
Can I help you?
Carrie asked. The woman grinned.
I'm Julia Carter, your mentor of sorts. I'm so happy to meet you.
Carrie perked up.
You're Presley's sister-in-law? Oh my goodness, she talks about you all the time. And I'm guessing you must be baby Layla?
Carrie excitedly gestured at the baby in the stroller. Julia nodded.
Eduardo was kind enough to give us a ride here. Want to come inside? I could use a drink. It's incredibly hot out here. I'd love that. Just to warn you, we don't have furniture aside from an island table and a bed. Maybe Miles and his next wife can decorate the villa.
Carrie hadn't meant to let that slip. She was just angry that she had believed Miles wanted her. He was free with his endearments, and the kisses they shared set her on fire. But of course, this always happened to her. People got her hopes up, making her believe she'd be accepted. Then they turned their backs on her.
The only people who ever loved Keri were her parents, Simon, Presley, and Yolanda. Why did she think it would ever be different? That's okay. Maybe we can pick out furniture together. Miles isn't the sort who likes decorating, Julia replied, ignoring the hint of another woman in the picture. Keri blinked. So you're going to ignore me mentioning another woman? Julia smiled. If another woman were in the picture, they never would have tolerated you marrying him. Why don't you walk me through everything that happened, and we can figure out what to do next? There's only one thing to do, hit him over the head with a frying pan, Keri thought to herself. But she placated Julia by nodding. Julia scooped her baby out of the stroller, and they walked inside. She smiled at Keri. Do you mind holding her? I have to get her bag. Keri gathered the happy child into her arms, and Julia waddled outside. She glanced down at the baby, who smiled up at her and began cooing. Layla was gorgeous, with tan skin and a head of dark curls. Her beautiful, gentle eyes drew Keri in. One day, she wanted to hold a child of her own. Being a mother had been something she'd yearned for ever since she was a kid. But how could that happen when every guy who had a chance to get to know her bailed? Before the pity could seriously set in, Julia entered, carrying an overstuffed bag. She placed it on the island and pulled out a mat. She placed it on the floor, then reached for the baby. Keri reluctantly handed the child over, and Julia placed the baby on the mat. The child wiggled in excitement when Julia handed her a rattle. Then she turned one of the stools to face her baby and sat down. Keri opened the fridge and took out a bottle of apple juice. Would you like some? Julia nodded. Keri poured them each a glass before putting the bottle back into the fridge. She handed one glass to Julia and sat down on the bar stool beside her guest with the other. What do you think you saw? Julia's question made Keri arch her brow. You mean, what did I see? Julia shot Keri a gentle expression. Why don't you start from the beginning? Keri found herself trusting the woman. It helped that Presley gave her bestie status. Keri found herself sipping her juice and catching up on what went on at the island. As soon as she got to the part about Kelly, Julia pulled out her phone. She texted someone, then eyed Keri thoughtfully. My brother-in-law, Sal, and Miles are best friends. I texted him to see if he's heard of this Kelly Cummings woman. He replied with no, so I don't think they're together. Miles is the charming type. I wonder if he's trying to get information out of Kelly. Information? Julia nodded. I wouldn't jump to conclusions if I were you. How could Miles go from not knowing Kelly's name one moment to having an affair with her the next? It could have been an act. Julia shook her head. If he was dating Kelly, he would never have married you. That's just not the kind of person Miles is. Now that we're done with this, tell me about yourself. Keri's stomach dropped. There wasn't much to say about herself that was flattering. What could she tell Julia? That she had a degree in high school education but couldn't be hired because she was awkward as hell? By the time Julia left, Keri knew how to order groceries, had applied for a job, and was shown a few places on the island that sold handmade furniture. She would hold off on the decorating until she got the truth from Miles. If he was as honest as Julia suggested, he would just fess up. Eduardo picked Julia and the baby up a couple of hours later. The moment Julia left, the house felt empty. All she could think about was what Miles was up to. Were he and Kelly getting to know each other? Were they on the beach somewhere? Had they escalated to bedroom activities, carrying on as if wife could simply put up with it? Before her thoughts could toss her into an anxiety attack, Miles walked through the front door, carrying a bouquet of tiger lilies, her favorite kind of flower. The tiger lilies were in a stunning vase. He placed them in the middle of the island.
Beautiful flowers for an extraordinary woman. Do you like them? Miles asked.
Carrie's heart melted. Carrie had never received flowers before. Confusion mingled with excitement. She wasn't sure what to do. She had been planning on questioning Miles, but his eyes captured hers. They were filled with passion and excitement. Why would she ruin a moment like that? She rushed into his arms and gave him a warm hug. Miles held her close and placed a kiss on the top of her head.
I missed you, beautiful.
I missed you too. What did you have to take care of?
Something for work, and then I wanted to get you tiger lilies. I texted Presley and she told me that it was your favorite flower. Did you enjoy your time with Julia?
Carrie peered up and saw the kindness that rested in his eyes. She didn't think she was one to misjudge people. There was no way Miles was cheating on her. Something in her heart told her there was an explanation as to why he was talking to Kelly Cummings. You knew she was coming? Miles nodded.
Eduardo is my best friend. Remember, I figured seeing Julia would have been a nice surprise for you. She's really nice and enjoyed her time with you. So, what did you guys do today?
I learned how to place orders, and I applied for a teaching job. We'll see if I'm even asked to interview.
Miles gently kissed Carrie's forehead. Only think positively, beautiful. No need to invite negativity in your life. You'll get the interview and charm the interviewer the same way you charmed me. They won't be able to resist hiring you.
Let's hope so. Miles's lips brushed over her cheek before he pulled away from her.
I have to make a call, but afterwards, want to shop for furniture?
Sure. Miles pulled his cell phone from his pocket and left the kitchen. A huge smile stretched across Carrie's face. Miles thought her charming. He bought her flowers. They shared kisses. Regardless of the doubts that were becoming fainter and fainter, she would give her all to this romance. Chapter 11. Carrie plopped down in the seat beside her friend Presley. Her eyes surveyed the establishment, a bar and grill with tables, stools, booths, and a bar that had every stool occupied. Tonight was karaoke night. Carrie wasn't going to partake, but would enjoy the music nonetheless. It was Tuesday night, and nerves were getting to her. She should be hearing from the school soon. Presley shoved a mozzarella stick into her mouth. I love your outfit, girl. How have you been? Carrie's friend had no idea she was asking a loaded question. Judging by the fact that Leah and Yolanda were heading their way, arm in arm, there wasn't much time to get into it. This outing had been suggested by Yolanda, who needed a break just a couple of days into her marriage. Presley's twin Ainsley and her husband Kevin were entering a karaoke competition. So Presley figured they would kill two birds with one stone. Their husbands would be joining them later, since it was a bit before the event started. The women all decided to come early so they'd be able to catch up. While Yolanda wore shorts and a crop top, Leah chose a sleeveless yellow dress with a floral pattern. Carrie, wanting to look presentable yet enticing to her new husband, decided on a low-cut, flowery top and shorts that accentuated her legs and bottom. Presley took a beautiful but conservative route, wearing a black short-sleeved dress that reached her knees and black sandals. Hey, ladies, what have we missed? Yolanda asked before taking the seat in front of Carrie. Leah, being tactical, left an empty seat between Yolanda and herself. You didn't miss anything. I was just asking Carrie how things were going with Miles. Why are you sitting over there? Presley asked. Leah shrugged. I want to sit next to my husband later. Moving once is easier than moving twice. Thanks, by the way. She snatched one of Presley's mozzarella sticks and shoved it into her mouth. You didn't ask me for it, Leah, Presley pointed out. Leah grinned after finishing the appetizer. I didn't have to. I could sense that you were going to offer. Now, Keri, why is your aura clogged with doubt and uncertainty?
Keri's eyes widened.
My what? What are you talking about, Leah?
Leah shook her head.
Okay, fine. Why are you nervous and uncertain? I applied for a position at the high school. I'm so nervous that No, there's a story there. Tell me what's going on. Are you unsure about Miles?
Yolanda whistled. Damn, woman, you seriously will ask anybody anything. Before we get Carrie to spill her guts, let's get some wine. Thankfully, the waitress appeared. Carrie wanted to groan when she realized that Kelly Cummings was serving them. Carrie eyed the group with curiosity in her eyes.
Carrie, I didn't expect to see you here. Aren't you and Miles supposed to be honeymooning?
Nausea filled Carrie's stomach.
We decided to hang with friends.
Kelly laughed.
Did Miles realize that getting a mail-order bride wasn't as exciting as it seemed?
Kelly's question made anger swim through Carrie's veins. She wished she could tell the lady to stay away from her man, but Carrie wasn't much for confrontation. Leah, on the other hand, had no problems asking.
You know, if you weren't reeking with desperation, you could probably bag a rich guy. Maybe you should, I don't know, hide your motives?
Kelly scowled.
I won't be serving you ladies. I'm sorry, I can't do it.
She flung her apron on the ground and stormed out of the restaurant.
Nice work, Leah. You beat me to the punch,
Presley said. Leah shrugged.
I hate bullies. I'm glad she won't be serving us. She would have spat in our drinks for sure. Now that the hard lady's gone, tell us what's going on, Carrie.
Carrie took a deep breath and spilled her guts. She knew that Presley would insist on it eventually and didn't want Miles to accidentally overhear the tail end of the conversation. She outlined everything, including the picnic, Julia's visit, the flowers, and the joyous days they had spent together. As soon as she finished the story, Presley rubbed her back.
Your best bet is just to ask him. The last thing you want to do is let the suspicions fester. Trust me when I say misunderstandings can kill a relationship.
Carrie frowned.
Or I can just forget about it. Things have been so good with Miles. What if he gets upset if I asked him about Kelly?
Yolanda scowled. Then he's not the one for you, Carrie. Carrie was about to protest her friend's advice, but a new waitress approached. This woman was tall, with blue eyes and strawberry blonde hair. She was also 10 times nicer than Kelly. The group ordered red wine and mozzarella sticks to share. Once she left, the girls caught up on their lives. It was nice to hear about the orphanage, Yolanda's struggles with Greg, and Leah's interesting take on marriage. A cowbell ringtone reached Carrie's ears. The group eyed Leah, who fetched a phone out of her big purse. She glanced at her iPhone, then scowled.
Well, ladies, Yolanda and I have to go. We have a regretful event to attend with our oh-so-gracious mother-in-law.
Yolanda shook her head. If I don't read the text, then she can't be mad at me if I don't go. Presley held up a hand.
What's going on, ladies?
Yolanda grinned. Unfortunately for us, the Addams family is a tight-knit family. If someone texts family emergency in the group chat, we should all come running. Presley glared at Leah.
A family emergency isn't an event.
Leah smirked.
With this family, it is. Trust me. Yolanda, we might as well go. Elena shouldn't have to deal with this all by herself. Us mobs have to stick together.
Mobs? Carrie asked in confusion.
Mail order brides,
Leah clarified. Fine. Yolanda grumbled before opening her purse and putting some cash on the table. Leah followed suit, and the women bid their friends goodbye before leaving.
Leah's awesome, Keri said.
Presley frowned.
Elena's not taking to being a mob too well.
Carrie's heart ached for the single mom. She seemed easily frightened. Keri didn't know much about the Adamses men, but knew they were trouble. Presley had told her of the trouble that they tended to during one of her phone conversations.
Have you tried befriending her?
Keri wondered. Presley sighed.
She barely says anything to me. Maybe you'll have better luck.
Keri shook her head.
Me? I don't think so, Presley. I can barely make it through a conversation without sticking my foot in my mouth.
Presley shot Keri a disapproving look.
Stop being so hard on yourself. Besides, you survived speaking to Leah just fine. That's because Leah's awesome.
Nope, I won't hear of it. You aren't speaking badly of yourself, Presley declared. A warm hand on Keri's shoulder made her heart rate spike. She knew exactly who it was. Hey, beautiful. Presley stood and moved down a seat. By then, the women had finished gorging themselves on mozzarella sticks, so Presley only needed to move her half glass of red wine.
Hi, handsome,
Keri said. She watched as Sal, Presley's husband, slid in beside his wife and wrapped an arm around her shoulder. Presley's face lit up, and she leaned into him. Miles sat beside Keri and gently kissed her on her cheek. Ainsley and her husband Kevin sat in Leah and Yolanda's vacated seats. A beautiful redhead and a stunning man with dark hair joined the table. The redhead eyed Keri and smiled widely.
You must be Carrie. I'm Tessa, one of the first mail order brides to grace this island with her presence. Welcome!
Thanks. It's nice to meet you too, Keri said.
And this is my husband, Thomas, but Tom to me, Tessa added, caressing her husband's cheek.
Nice to meet you, Miss Teriz. I'm looking forward to getting to know you.
Tessa groaned.
Tom, just call her Carrie. You don't need to be so formal all the time.
Thomas smiled.
It doesn't seem like Miss Teriz is opposed to me addressing her formally. Why do you care so much?
Tessa smacked her forehead.
Did I forget to give you the rules of the night? Act like you're not a 15th century lord for one moment was the first rule I wrote out for you.
Presley grinned.
They always argue about this. Ignore them.
Keri liked seeing them together. Thomas wasn't a social butterfly, she could tell, and yet Tessa accepted his oddities. Keri sensed in Tessa's green eyes that she didn't want her husband to change. Keri was beginning to believe that Miles could offer her the same acceptance. She had spilled drinks, gotten food on her shirt, and tripped over nothing that morning. Miles had caught Keri before her face could slam down into the hard wood of the bedroom. His eyes were filled with concern, not judgment. Tessa sighed.
If only I'd married a husband who would do what I wanted. Oh, before I forget, I'm creating a mail order bride group chat. We have to stick together, and I have to share Esperanza's son's baby pictures. Baby Junior's adorable.
Tessa patted her own stomach with wistfulness in her gaze.
If only my bean would just pop right out, it would make things a lot easier, and I miss drinking.
Ainsley blushed. Me too. Presley gasped.
Twin? What are you saying?
I'm saying that I won't be able to drink for the next while, Ainsley responded.
Oh, so you're pregnant. Congratulations. That's amazing.
Keri rushed out. Ainsley nodded. Thanks. Kevin and I are super happy about it. The rest of the night was blissful. Ainsley and Kevin won the karaoke contest, Miles showed Keri affection at every turn, and she managed not to spill her salad on herself. But what took the cake was that she checked her email when they returned to the village via carriage driven by Eduardo, of course. Keri found out that she had an interview for her dream job. Chapter 12. Keri entered the kitchen on Friday morning, her heart racing so badly that her chest ached. The smell of waffles reached her nose. Miles was sitting at the island drinking a cup of coffee. He glanced at the place setting beside his. Miles's eyes traveled up and down Keri's back. Tasteful dress with a hungry gaze. Butterflies danced in Keri's stomach, his reaction making her feel as though she would combust. Keri was surprised that the dress she typically wore on interviews would make her husband react that way. Keri wore this dress because black hid a lot of stains, but she didn't want to risk eating in it. "Hey, beautiful, I made you waffles." Miles grinned at her, and she debated telling him that she wasn't hungry. But then her stomach growled furiously. "Thank you." An idea struck Keri. She entered the pantry, which wasn't stocked with much aside from canned goods, and found a folded apron that said "Wife" on it in bold letters. She shrugged into the apron and then sat down at her place setting. Miles chuckled. "Smart and resourceful." "I want to enjoy my waffles." After smothering the waffles in maple syrup, Keri took her first bite. Her taste buds were literally in heaven. She gestured at the empty place setting in front of her husband. "Why aren't you eating waffles?" Miles shrugged. "I'm more of a bagel and cream cheese kind of guy. I had one earlier." "Cassandra came through. I checked. Would love a groom who could cook on the questionnaire." Interest lit Miles's eyes.
Why did you become a mail order bride?
"To be honest, I grew up in a small town. I've been stuck around the same people since first grade. I didn't make a love connection with anyone, so I thought, why not? When Presley brought up the idea, it seemed exciting. My question is, why didn't you sign up for a mail order bride?"
Miles rubbed his forehead.
So far, the brides have been nice, but I thought I'd wait until I fully settled before applying. Had my parents told me that's what they wanted for me, I would have told them that. But it's okay since everything happens for a reason. Beautiful, why do you act like you're hiding something from me?
Keri stiffened.
"What do you mean?"
Miles shrugged.
Maybe you're not hiding something from me per se. It just feels like sometimes I get the real you and other times you're just so cautious, like you don't feel fully comfortable around me. You're a great person, and I like everything about you.
Keri smiled.
"I like everything about you too, Miles."
Keri was half tempted to tell her husband about the horrible way men back home viewed her, but thought better of it. He liked her despite some of the accidents she had. That was a victory in and of itself. What if revealing her past bullying made Miles change his mind about her? Why did it matter that Miles never heard of the clumsy Keri nickname? Keri promised herself that Portum Island would be a fresh start. She was nervous about the interview, but presented herself differently. Her phone rang, and it startled her so much that she dropped her fork. Some of the maple syrup spattered up against her apron. Keri let out a groan, wiped her hand on a napkin, and answered Presley's call.
"Hey, Keri, how are things going?" "Nervous as hell, but trying to stay positive. What are you doing today?"
Presley groaned.
"A mountain of laundry. Not too excited about it, but it has to be done. I was wondering if you and Miles would like to stop by the orphanage tonight. I'm teaching some of the kids how to make baked mac and cheese.
That sounds fun. I'll have to check with Miles to see if he's busy. Do you need me to bring anything?
Just be yourself, babe. Oh, and your brains? I think some of the kids are having trouble with math.
I'll be glad to help, Presley. See you tomorrow night.
Yes, girl, we have so much catching up to do. Good luck on your interview.
Thanks, Keri said before hanging up the phone. She eyed Miles, who had a curious expression on his face.
What was that about?
Miles asked. Presley invited us to have dinner at the orphanage, Keri replied. Miles's face fell. She wasn't sure what it meant, but had the feeling she wasn't going to like what came out of his mouth next.
I promised Eduardo that I'd help him with something.
Oh? What does he need help with? Would you like my help? I could tell Presley that you guys need me. Miles shook his head.
Have fun with your friends, Carrie. I'll plan a date for us tomorrow night.
Carrie knew he was being ridiculous and insecure, but she couldn't help but wonder what Eduardo and Miles were up to. Was Eduardo and Miles planning on hanging out with other women? Was Eduardo hoping to convince Miles to leave Carrie? She wished she had brothers other than Simon. He was a loner and didn't much care for company of other people. Comparing his behavior to other men was pointless.
Hey, beautiful. You're going to be late if you don't finish up,
Miles warned. Carrie blinked in surprise, then realized she had stopped eating. She continued eating her breakfast, reminding herself that her husband had just planned an event for the next evening. If he was up to something bad, he surely wouldn't have done that. Eduardo was the man tasked with driving the carriage that would bring Carrie and her husband to the center of the island. It was raining, so the detachable roof was on the carriage. She sat by her husband in the first row, her knee bouncing from nerves. The last interview hadn't gone well. The saving grace that Carrie had this time was that she didn't think she could stick her foot in her mouth. There would be no exposing affairs. Considering that she had no idea who Jenna Lawson even was, though the surname did sound familiar. Had one of those mail-order brides had the last name Lawson? Miles gently rubbed Carrie's arm, sending sparks through her.
Beautiful. What's on your mind?
I can't very well tell you that I'm worried about the time you spend with Eduardo. It sounds selfish and clingy, Carrie thought to herself. Instead, she decided to go with the second thing that was occupying her mind. The last name Lawson sounds so familiar. Didn't one of those mail-order brides marry into that family? Miles nodded.
2 brides married into the Lawson family. Esperanza is married to Asher, who is a councilman, and Liz is married to Marcus, who is my boss. He owns the processing center. Jenny Lawson, the woman you are interviewing with, is their aunt. She's going to love you, trust me.
Carrie had her doubts, but still had to go through with the interview. She couldn't very well live in the villa for the rest of her life, hoping that furniture would finally be delivered. Spending the days there while her husband went to work was boring. Presley was taking care of the kids at the orphanage, and Yolanda had her own strange situation going on. Simon updated her from time to time via text, but he really didn't have much to say. Her parents had gotten Eduardo's footage of their wedding and told her that they thought her and Miles looked good together. Carrie also did a walkthrough of the villa via FaceTime. Her parents were thrilled with what they saw. They promised that they'd visit when they could get away from work. Carrie was nervous about telling them about the properties of the barrier, but figured she had to come clean. It wasn't fair for her parents not to be warned about the effects. Besides, did Carrie really want to live a long life without her parents? Selfishly, she didn't think she could. She had to talk to Cassandra about how to proceed with this. By the time the carriage pulled up to the community center, Carrie's face was sore from smiling so much. Miles decided to distract her. He told horrible jokes that she found funny. She was disappointed when her husband had been dropped off at the processing center, but his encouragement still warmed her in his absence. Eduardo opened the door, and she stumbled out, holding an umbrella over her head. By mistake, she ended up hitting the poor man on the head. Eduardo smirked and grabbed her arm, making sure she didn't faceplant onto the pavement. She got up onto the sidewalk and smiled at him.
Thanks so much, Eduardo. I really do appreciate your help.
Carrie's words made him grin.
As long as you keep my friend happy, you're all right with me, Carrie.
She entered the community center and spotted a tall brunette wearing a pantsuit in the lobby. She closed her umbrella, and the woman gestured for her to come closer.
You must be Keri Teriz. I'm Lisa Cummings, filling in for Jenna Lawson. Jenna has the flu. Come with me.
Carrie blurted out the first words that came to mind.
Cummings, as in Kelly Cummings? Relative? Oh, wow, this could be awkward. What would be awkward about interviewing with me? Do you have something against my daughter?
Carrie knew that this interview was dead on arrival. She concentrated on finding words that might placate the woman who now looked highly irritated.
No, of course not. Kelly is a smart, charming woman. I'm sure she'll find another job. Follow me, Miss Teriz.
Chapter 13.
You should be hearing from someone from HR in a week.
The cold words from Miss Cummings made disappointment travel to Carrie's soul. She had blown yet another interview. Granted, this time Mrs. Cummings had asked her the appropriate questions and spent a good hour grilling her. But she could see in that woman's eyes that Carrie was not at the top of her list.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to interview,
Carrie said. She opened her umbrella and pushed through one of the glass double doors, missing Mrs. Cummings's response to her, which was okay. Carrie stepped out into the rain, wondering how the hell she was getting home. In her nerves, she had forgotten to ask Miles how to rent a carriage, and she damn well didn't know how to ride a horse, and walking in this weather would be miserable. As if her thoughts summoned it, a carriage pulled up in front of her, Eduardo driving the team of horses. He stepped down and opened the carriage door for her. Carrie thanked him for hurrying as the steps were kind of slippery, and she nearly fell face first into her seat, but she caught herself with her hands. After sitting in one of the plush seats, the door was closed. The ride was somewhat longer due to the horrible weather, although all she could think about was how the hell she could reinvent herself. It didn't look like being a teacher was a practical option anymore. By the time Eduardo pulled up to the villa, Carrie was determined to surf the web to find a different profession. He opened the door and she took his arm, not wanting to risk falling again. He helped her disembark and she smiled at him.
Eduardo, would you like to come in for some tea?
Eduardo snickered.
Do I look like a tea-drinking kind of guy?
Or beer?
Eduardo patted Carrie on the shoulder.
I have to actually report for my day job. You're a nice woman, Carrie, and before you ask, Miles is a huge fan of charcuterie boards. Loves cheese like it's water. Oh, and he also likes horses in case you're planning a date.
Of course. I wanted to know what things would make Miles happy, but I also want to get you out of the rain.
Eduardo grinned.
You're a good woman, Carrie. Take care of my man for me.
Eduardo hopped back into the coachman's seat, whistled, and he was off. Miles let out a curse as soon as Eduardo drove the carriage up to the villa. He recognized the silver and chrome carriage his parents often used.
Steve was sitting in the coachman's seat, a relaxed expression on his face. Steve was a tall, skinny man with strawberry blonde hair and blue eyes that only held joy. Since the rain had stopped and the sun was out, Miles couldn't blame him for his attitude. As soon as his best friend opened the carriage, Miles took the steps. Eduardo tapped him on the back.
Are you ready for the raid?
Miles sighed. I just hope my parents don't plan on staying for long. Eduardo shrugged.
Your parents will do whatever they please. Maybe your wife can invite them to the orphanage.
Guilt filled Miles's heart. Carrie had been excited for him to go, but he had to turn her down in order to apprehend criminals. After the raid was complete, Miles promised himself he'd tell Carrie everything. Miles despised seeing the distrust in Carrie's eyes every time he took a phone call outside. He couldn't blame her for the reaction. Wasn't that the first sign of a cheating spouse? Then he was doing the second most obvious thing people warned about, skipping events. Miles knew he could trust Carrie. You might as well stick around so I can ride with you to town, Miles decided. Eduardo dramatically groaned.
I hate it when you're making sense.
After saying hello to Steve, who declined going inside, the men entered the villa. Immediately, the scent of cinnamon-flavored incense hit Miles's nose. Ugh, he preferred vanilla. In the kitchen, Carrie was seated on a bar stool at the place setting and was set with a teacup and a saucer. Bethany was across from Carrie with a similar place setting in front of her. His father was standing by the cabinet, his arms crossed. Let's take it from the top, honey. Pretend I'm Diana Adams, one of the most powerful women on the island. His mother's words made dread shoot through Miles's heart. He was certain that Carrie had one of those stuffy afternoon teas in her future. Carrie pressed her lips together. Hi, Diana. It's nice to meet you. We've talked about this, Carrie. Unless she allows you to call her Diana, you call her Miss Adams, his mother Bethany lectured. Carrie sighed. Maybe I can get Thomas to tutor me on this stuff. Miles chuckled. Thomas only acts so formal to piss off Tessa. Carrie made eye contact with Miles. Miles, it's so great to see you. I'd get up to hug you, but apparently I'm at afternoon tea. Yay. Miles's father shook his head.
Son, did you consummate the marriage?
Carrie blushed while rage slammed into Miles's heart.
What kind of question is that?
Cassandra made a huge mistake pairing you with Carrie. I'm thinking if you hadn't consummated the marriage, we could get your marriage annulled and we could send Carrie back to Virginia. I'll have to read the profiles myself this time to get you a suitable bride. She won't last a second in one of the society afternoon teas.
Carrie stood up so fast that she knocked over the bar stool she was sitting on. Her eyes were wide with terror. She rushed from the kitchen, her steps echoing through the barely furnished villa. Miles wavered between running after her and socking his own father in the face. What the hell was Leo Teriz thinking?
Father, I need you and Mom to leave,
Miles said. His father's eyes widened.
You watch your tone, son.
I need to watch my tone? How about you watch your words? Carrie is a person, not a prop. So what if she doesn't know how to make a polite conversation with Diana Adams? It isn't important because I have zero interest in becoming a councilman. I have said that to you over and over again, and you never listen.
If you know what's best for you, you'll start campaigning. You'll divorce Carrie and find someone more suitable. You will win your seat on the council.
I'm not interested. Why don't you and Mom have another child so you can make them a member of the council?
Mom held up a hand. Rick, calm down. It was Carrie's first time working with me. I'm sure after a couple of months she'll become comfortable with—"
"We don't have a couple of months. What was Cassandra thinking when she paired that woman with my son? You know what? I'll give Cassandra a piece of my mind."
"You will do no such thing, Leo. Look at our son. For the first time he's happy. Carrie is a lovely woman, and you're just impatient because she was invited to tea next week."
"Being happy doesn't win a council seat."
"Rick, are you implying that you only married me because I made you look good?" Bethany demanded. Miles's father wilted.
"No, Bethany. You know I love you."
"Just like Miles loves Carrie. So telling him to divorce his wife was disrespectful. You'd be lucky if Miles forgives you for saying something so horrible," Bethany said. Councilman Teriz took a deep breath.
"Miles, I'm sorry for what I said to Carrie. Give her my apologies. Let's go, Bethany. We don't want to leave Trudy and Jack waiting."
Bethany got up from her seat, took her husband's arm, and they left the villa. Chapter 14. Carrie sat down on the edge of the bed, trying to keep her emotions at bay. Miles didn't agree with what his father had said. Carrie could sense that her husband was close to shouting at him, but what the councilman said hurt her soul. While practicing with Bethany, Carrie felt like she was making some sort of progress. Bethany shot her patient smiles, nodded, and encouraged her. Apparently, Carrie wasn't learning quickly enough. Would Miles come to regret agreeing to marry her? Would he decide that the seat on the council was more important than having a wife who messed up everything? Would she ever stop being clumsy? Those questions flooded her head so much that she hadn't noticed when her husband entered the room. He gently cupped her face, which elicited a shriek from her. "Beautiful. I didn't mean to scare you," Miles said. "Are they gone? Am I acting like one of those scared kids on the playground, hiding from her bully?" Carrie thought to herself.
"It's just you, Eduardo, and I here."
Carrie groaned. "I can't believe he witnessed that."
Miles shrugged. "Nothing for you to be embarrassed about. It was my father acting like a fool, not you."
"This tea is important for your campaign.
Carrie, there will be no campaign. I'm not running for council. I never wanted to. My father never takes no for an answer. But I'm not giving in to him. I want the island to thrive, and I don't think it will be under my leadership."
Carrie frowned. "Do you have someone in mind?"
Miles's eyes lit up. "Liz Sanders will make a good addition to the council. Once I speak to Dad about her, he'll agree."
Carrie snorted. "Your father's obsessed with you being the councilman."
"No, beautiful. My father's obsessed with control. He thinks by planning my life out, it'll protect me."
Carrie had her doubts, but she supposed her husband did know his father best. "How will you approach telling your father about how you hope to put Liz on the council?" Miles's mouth opened, but then the sound of glass shattering reached them. Miles released Carrie and peered into her frightened eyes.
"Beautiful, go inside. I'll check things out."
Carrie frowned when raised voices were followed by a thump. Her heart sank when clarity reached her. "Oh, crap! We're being robbed! Miles is going to confront the burglars. What if they have weapons? I can't let Miles risk his life. Besides, there's nothing to steal. Eduardo's down there. He could surely do something about the criminals. No, wait. What if there's more than one?" Carrie asked herself. She knew Miles would never leave his best friend to fight alone. Miles was strong, loyal, and kind. Her husband pulled a stun gun from under the bed, then gestured to the closet.
"Hide.
Keri stood and rushed into the closet, being glad that her phone was in her hand. She'd call for help. Miles focused on this situation. His partner was being confronted by Kyle in his operation. He was sure of it. How had they been found out? Did someone notice the trackers? Miles didn't think so. To the average citizen, he was a trust fund man who worked at the processing center for something to do. Miles supposed it didn't matter how his mission had been compromised. He needed to apprehend the criminals. No time to be cautious, Miles thought to himself. Then he stepped out of his bedroom and made his way down the stairs. The confrontation was occurring in the living room. His best friend Eduardo was sitting on the stool that was dragged from the kitchen. Sheriff Becker had a gun trained on Eduardo. The presence of that weapon explained why his friend was being cooperative. Miles stared at Kyle's Cummings, the ringleader of the scene that was in danger of putting the island in danger. He leaned against the opposite wall, his arms crossed. Kelly stood beside him, her brown eyes wide with hope. Besides him was a man Miles didn't recognize. He was tall and thin, with short black hair and honey-brown skin. Every one of the intruders were dressed in all black. Miles's assumption was the plan was to get rid of them and dispose of their bodies. Black could hide a lot of stains. Miles eyed Eduardo, who had regret in his eyes.
Sorry, man. I brought the sheriff in, hoping that we could have backup for the raid.
Sheriff Becker chuckled.
Even if you hadn't called me, your plan wouldn't have worked. The moment you brought Kyle in, I would have helped him. After all, he's my right-hand man.
The stranger frowned.
I thought you said this was my accommodations. Why does this place have no furniture?
Kelly rested a hand on the man's shoulder.
Don't you worry, Reuben. After we marry, we'll live in a place nicer than this.
Reuben didn't look enthusiastic at the thought of marrying Kelly.
Are there other ladies that I can be introduced to?
Kyle shook his head.
I told you, Reuben, you'll only be given citizenship if you marry Kelly.
Reuben nodded.
I guess it was worth it.
Miles considered how he should use his stun gun. He supposed that since the sheriff was armed, it wasn't much of a threat. He eyed Reuben, who didn't seem to be eager to engage.
Reuben, what did these people promise you?
Miles asked.
Immortality,
Reuben said, his greedy eyes making Miles shudder.
Good luck finding it,
Eduardo muttered.
We can die just like everyone else.
Kelly pursed her lips.
Don't believe Eduardo. He doesn't want outsiders on the island.
You were smuggled onto the island, Reuben? Miles asked. Reuben glared.
I paid for the passage.
Miles rubbed his forehead. Kyle, you may have exposed Portum Island to the rest of the world.
So, it isn't like outsiders can come here on their own. The island only recognizes its citizens. That's why Cassandra needed to hire the triplets to transport her brides.
So your goal is to swindle people out of money then? Miles asked. The sheriff sighed.
Let's get to the point, boys. I need you to give me all the information you have on Kyle and his operation. If you don't provide it, I'll kill Carrie. I already have to kill both of you, but there's no sense in dragging an innocent woman into this.
Miles had little interest on gambling on Carrie's life. That woman was everything to him, but he knew the kind of man he was dealing with. He couldn't trust their word.
I'll only agree if you allow Carrie to leave the island. That's the only way I'll trust that you won't go after her,
Miles bargained. Regret filled Eduardo's eyes.
Don't give him anything, Miles. They aren't going to agree to your terms.
You can't trust them."
The sheriff looked interested.
"Kelly and Reuben can escort Carrie to the dock. Another shipment of brides are about to come in."
Eduardo snorted.
"Kelly would kill her the first chance she got."
Kelly paled.
"I'm not killing anyone."
The sheriff shot the woman a disapproving expression.
"Do you want to swim in riches or not?"
Eduardo snorted.
"There goes that ruse."
The sheriff aimed his gun at Eduardo's leg.
"I'll make your death painful if you don't spill."
Kelly frowned.
"I'm not going to be part of this. I like money, not blood and murder."
Kelly walked toward the door, but the sheriff's gun pointed at her. That was a huge mistake. Eduardo slammed into the sheriff, knocking him to the ground. Miles stepped forward, about to tackle Kyle, when the man pulled Kelly in front of him. Kelly struggled, but her brother held her tightly. Miles eyed the woman who wreaked havoc on innocent people's lives. His eyes bounced to Eduardo, who had taken control of the weapon and was now pressing it to the sheriff's forehead. Miles dove for Kyle, who let out a curse. He shoved his sister to the floor, his intent on escaping.
"Stay away from my husband!"
Carrie shouted as she rushed into the room. She had a can of hairspray in her hands. Kyle scowled and stepped in her direction. Carrie lifted the hairspray and depressed the button, the contents slamming into Kyle's face. Kyle covered his face and stepped back into the wall. In desperation, he pulled the bottom of his shirt up and covered his face. Miles stepped behind his wife and rested his hands on her shoulders. "Beautiful. It's over. You can stop now." The door slammed open and Portum Island's finest stormed in. Miles relaxed when the men took charge. Miles backed his wife away from the dangerous criminals. He stopped beside her and took her hand. "Let's get out of here, Carrie." Carrie dropped the can of hairspray and the two of them walked outside, where his worried parents were waiting. Miles eyed his father and decided that he must tell the truth. "I have chosen to serve the citizens of Portum Island, just not the way you wanted me to." Chapter 15. For a moment, everyone looked at each other, but then Carrie broke the tension. She rushed at Miles's mother, Bethany, and wrapped her arms around her.
"Oh my goodness, thank you so much for coming. You saved the day. I was afraid you wouldn't answer my calls because your husband wants me off the island and all. But you came through. If it weren't for the police, we'd all be dead. Seriously, I owe you my life. Like, seriously, I'll bake you cookies every weekend, and that still won't make up for what you did. Bethany patted Carrie's back. "That's what family's for, sweetheart. I, too, am lucky. It was your quick thinking that got us to our son in time." Miles's father, Leo, wasn't as enthusiastic about the reunion.
"Miles, what's going on?"
Miles rubbed his forehead. "I'm one of the first members of the PBI." Councilman Teriz sucked in a breath.
"So, it wasn't a burglary?"
"The sheriff's crooked. We'll have to elect another one," Miles said.
"Hold your horses. What in the hell is PBI?"
Carrie demanded after releasing Bethany. Miles rubbed his forehead. "Beautiful. I was going to tell you after the raid, but I'm not just a worker at a processing center. I got a job there so I could find out information. Kyle Cummings and his associates created online profiles. They'd lure desperate women who wanted to get married. These women would send things to them. With the merchandise in hand, the group would sell it to unsuspecting citizens at half price. They also had another scheme. From what I understand, they contracted the rich and desperate and told them that being on the island would make them immortal." Reuben is the first man to be smuggled onto the island. I'm not sure who did the smuggling, but I know it wasn't Cassandra and her friends. I probably would have found out had the raid been successful. Eduardo told the sheriff about the raid. He had no idea the sheriff was in on this. The sheriff wanted to kill us and destroy the evidence.
Keri groaned. I really want to be mad at you. I wish I could tell you something like, I can't believe you hid this from me. Or maybe I could go with, you lied to me and I'm your wife. But I kind of lied to you too. I became a mail-order bride because I was trying to outrun my nickname, Clumsy Carrie. No one would date me or hire me because of my horrible reputation. I thought if I hid that from you, you would also not call me Clumsy Carrie. Miles wished he could hunt down every single person who made his wife feel like she was inadequate. He'd either curse them out or throat punch them. His father, on the other hand, had a different focus.
The insult is juvenile at best. Clumsy Carrie isn't all that clever. Adults should have been embarrassed calling you something that ridiculous. Your name doesn't even begin with a C. Now, if I were to come up with an alternative...
Bethany put her hand on her husband's shoulder. Rick, that isn't the point of all this. Keri, I'm sorry if you felt like you had to hide your past from our family. I assure you, you're accepted for who you are, a smart, young lady with a heart and courage. Keri eyed Leo. Do you want to send me off the island still? Leo snorted.
I never planned on sending you off the island. I just thought if you had a bit of motivation, you'd try harder at your training. I know how you feel about my son.
Miles is part of the PBI. I don't need to train for tea parties anymore, Keri excitedly said. Councilman Teriz shook his head.
Miles, you just revealed Sheriff Daly for the fraud he was. That means the island needs a new sheriff. I think you should go for it.
Miles blinked in surprise, shocked his father wasn't giving him an order.
I'll think about it. The PBI needs someone who knows how they operate.
Councilman Teriz sighed.
You both should stay at our place tonight. Your home is a crime scene.
Keri grinned. We have to visit Presley first. I'm dying to see the orphanage. Before anyone could make a suggestion, 2 officers exited the house escorting Kyle, who reeked of hairspray. Kelly followed sedately behind the guards, her eyes wide with fear. The siblings were bundled into the carriage with another officer, and it pulled away from the villa.
What happened to Kyle?
Councilman Teriz asked. Miles grinned.
Carrie sprayed him in the face with hairspray.
By the time the carriage driven by Steve reached the orphanage, it was just after sunset. Keri glanced at the building in awe. It looked like a hotel. She and Miles stepped out of the carriage, which departed after Steve returned to his coachman's seat. Miles rested a hand on Keri's shoulder.
Can we talk?
Keri's heart pounded. Sure.
I love you, Keri. I promised myself that I would tell you after I figured out how to get us out of that jam. But I didn't even have to save you. You saved yourself. I'm honestly not surprised. You're clever, kind, and everything good.
Keri grinned. I love you too, Miles. And it killed me. I was hiding in the closet for like 2 seconds and then thought, oh, hell no, no one's going to hurt my man. Then I called your parents, and then I called Presley. Remembered that I packed hairspray. I figured it would make a good weapon. I decided to wait for an opening. I actually slid down the stairs. I didn't want anyone to hear my footsteps. I listened to the tail end. I'm happy to know Kelly wasn't willing to kill me.
I would have told you everything, and I'm so sorry for that.
Had I said something to you, you would have been...
Keri shook her head. You met me a week ago. How were you supposed to know if I was trustworthy? As long as we both made it, I say we leave our regrets behind. Are you taking the job of sheriff?
Miles frowned. I don't know.
You're so charming and good. I think you would be perfect for the job. Besides, at least if you take the job, there will be no more people wanting to kill me, I hope.
Miles pulled Keri into his arms and held her close. She reveled in his embrace, glad that the evil criminals hadn't taken him from her. She tilted her head up, and their lips met in a soft, sweet kiss. She didn't want to stop kissing Miles, but the door opened, and the sound of Presley's whistle reached their ears.
Well, I'm glad you're both still alive. Dinner's been served, so come in. After you eat, you can tell me everything.
Epilogue. 6 months later. Keri blinked in surprise when Leah pulled out a bag of chips from her big purse. Leah handed her a bag of salt and vinegar chips. Keri grinned, happy that one of her best friends remembered her favorite. Leah handed the other bag of chips to Yolanda, who was seated on her other side. Yolanda, out of breath, asked, "Is food even allowed in here?" Leah shrugged.
There are no signs saying that food isn't allowed.
The trio were in the back row of the council chambers. Today was the day that the former sheriff would face his reckoning. The trial was pointless since Miles and Eduardo had hundreds of pages of evidence against the sheriff. Kyle Cummings had also turned against the man for a lesser sentence. Kelly was only guilty of trusting that her brother would provide a wealthy groom. Her only punishment was that she had to marry Reuben after all. The couple weren't happy. They argued, which resulted in Kelly either throwing drinks at the wall or leaving high-profile restaurants in tears. Rumor had it that Reuben was tight with the coffers. Kelly couldn't go on frivolous spending sprees. Gasp. Reuben's ultimate sin was giving his greedy wife an allowance. Thankfully, Reuben had been the only man smuggled onto the island. Regretfully, a lot of people desperate to find love were swindled. Miles told Keri that there would be a task force created to hunt down these people and make things right. She hoped that the council made good on that promise. As for Keri, life pretty much went on. She was hired by the high school to teach algebra, which was her favorite. Yolanda, Presley, Leah, and she hung out when they could. She was really close to Julia, who was patient and encouraged her. The best part was that her parents agreed to relocate to Portum Island. Oftentimes, they held barbecues where everyone would gather and catch up.
I can't believe I almost missed this, Tessa huffed as she took the seat beside Keri.
Tessa took to motherhood quite well. There was a special glow in her eye that Keri loved seeing.
Where is Thomas?
Keri wondered.
He's at home with Joy. He has zero interest in watching the corrupt sheriff get sentenced. It's enough for him just to read about it. Isn't he so boring?
You love him anyway, though,
Keri replied.
Damn straight, and I'll shout it from the rooftops,
Tessa said before pulling out her phone.
I promised to tape this for Julianne and Presley. They're pissed they're missing it. Things at the orphanage are busy as usual. They couldn't get away.
Leah grinned.
The evil one is about to arrive. Tessa, do you want your snack now or after the show?
Tessa grinned.
I need some popcorn for the show.
Leah tossed Tessa a Ziploc bag stuffed full of popcorn.
You're awesome, Leah.
I know,
Leah replied.
I hate wearing a suit,
Miles thought to himself. He was sweating bullets. He was standing by the table where the councilman sat. Eduardo stood beside him, dressed in slacks and a button-down. No one could make the man do anything.
It took a while for his best friend to get over the guilt of telling Sheriff Becker about the raid. Miles would have done the same thing if given the chance. He told his friend as much. Asher Lawson got to his feet. His eyes met mine. The unease in his eyes told him that the council had made a difficult decision.
Thank you for coming today. The council has decided on the fate of Robert J. Becker, the former sheriff of Portum Island. Gentlemen, please escort him out.
A door by the table opened, and the sheriff walked between two officers. His hands were cuffed behind his back. The sheriff wore sweatpants and a t-shirt, traditional wear given to prisoners. The shorts had no pockets. He walked barefoot, which was an indignity on trust upon the criminals. He eyed Miles and Eduardo with hatred. While Miles ignored the man, Eduardo scowled at him.
Robert Becker, you have been found guilty of treason. You jeopardized the safety of our island. You took an oath to protect our people, but you endangered them instead. You were ruled by greed. We had difficulty determining a punishment. Some wanted to banish you from the island, while others wanted you imprisoned for a century. Neither punishment is befitting for what you did. You will be the first sentenced to life sentence. For all the days of your life, you will be in prison.
Miles couldn't fault the councilman for such a harsh punishment. It served as a deterrent to anyone that would be corrupt. The sheriff glared.
I'll appeal.
Asher nodded.
And that's your right. Take him away.
The police officers walked the disgraced former sheriff through the same door he entered from. Asher let out a breath and eyed Miles.
Now for the next order of business. Councilman Teriz is retiring his seat on the council. There will be a meeting held on Friday to discuss the nominations, and elections for sheriff will be held next week.
Miles was unopposed, which wasn't surprising. No one wanted to run the police force. Hell, Miles wasn't fully sold on the job.
"Want to get the hell out of here?"
Eduardo whispered.
"Sure."
Asher continued speaking as the two friends walked up the aisle. Miles wasn't surprised when his wife was sitting in the back row. Her friends were snacking on food Leah probably snuck in. When his wife spotted Miles, she got to her feet and tossed herself at him.
"I can't hold it in anymore. I'm pregnant,"
she said a little bit too loudly. But Miles didn't care. The announcement made him grin. He held Carrie close, feeling blessed that he had the love of someone so wonderful. The end. This has been Carrie, Bride's Dock on Portum Island, Book 7, by Debbie Civil. Narrated by Ishkia Page. Copyright 2023 by Debbie Civil. All rights reserved.